Okay, I think we're live. Welcome to my Creative Contessa medieval sewing party. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. I am the Creative Contessa, the Contessa, as some of you know me. And today I've got a lot of fun things to discuss with you while we get creative together, while I sew on things. I've got lots of topics lined up and lots of fun information to share with you. So let's dive right in with the now traditional getting dressed as the beginning of our medieval sewing party. So today I am going to be talking about kirtles because I received questions from many of you, different questions actually, about the kirtle. So I was actually, my first plan was to go 15th century Florentine today, but then I realized if I'm talking about kirtles, I should probably wear a kirtle. So just let me know, everyone, if you're there, if you can actually hear me, what the sound is, if you can hear me at all, or if I'm just talking into the void. So first step, of course, I've already partially dressed because I don't want to get banned by any of the social media platforms on which I'm streaming today. And today I would like to welcome my communities from YouTube, from TikTok, and from Facebook. Thank you all for supporting me and being part of this adventure of learning about the Middle Ages and material culture by living it firsthand. So this is a smock, and many of you know what this is, but that's for those of you who maybe haven't seen the getting dressed before. This is a linen undergarment. This is the layer that goes right against the skin. And if you could see the kind of schmutz that has developed around the collar, ring around the collar, you would understand why you want to wear one of these, because this is the layer that gets worn. Thank you, condottiero mio. And this one is, of course, this is my own pattern, is my own design, but it is geometric construction and it is based on the extant garments that we have found, or pieces of garments that we have found sort of across the 13th, 14th, and 15th century. And it is produced, it is created, manufactured in such a way so that it has some shaping in the body. It's narrow in the waist, wider in the hips and the chest, so that it actually follows the lines of the fitted kirtle, which is the next layer. So this is number 47. Okay, great. Welcome to episode 47 of my medieval sewing party. Even though it's had different names over the years, I actually started doing this years ago with basically just sort of informal live stream chats, and it's evolved from there to be something, some combination of a medieval stitch and bitch with a history lecture, which I guess some people have said is their favorite kind of history lecture. Right, so on top of this smock, which by the way, this is the layer that gets laundered regularly in boiling water, usually with fermented urine to help bleach it, and it's dried on a rack, and then it's laid out on a laundry meadow, a green basically, so that the oxygen being respirated by the grass will help bleach it from below, and the UV light, hopefully if you have sun, from above, you get this dual bleaching effect that restores your whites to their original whites. So if you need to whiten a garment that has yellowed with age, by the way, no matter its era, if you lay it on the grass in the sun, it will actually bleach back out again. Yeah. So just to make sure, just so everyone knows, I am trying to keep an eye on the live chat, but sometimes it moves really quickly. And for me to actually do the thing I'm doing for you all, I can't just be staring at the live chat the whole time. Right. But if you would like to interact with me on a more direct level, like actually talk with your voice and see each other's faces, I do live Zoom sessions with my patrons and channel members, my Patreon patrons and my channel members. Our next one is coming up this week. So I hope to see many of you there, and we'll actually talk like with our voices in the old-fashioned way of a Zoom chat, of an old-fashioned Zoom chat. So if you're interested in joining that kind of medieval sewing party, just become a patron or a channel member and you have access. Okay, next layer is the kirtle. And today I'm going with this kirtle specifically because of one of the questions that was asked of me. The kirtle, it's spelled 24, 25 different ways in 15th century English, is known as a cote simple in French. It's known as a camora in certain parts of Italy, or a gamora in certain parts of Italy. And this is the next layer. This goes over top of your smock, and this ostensibly helps provide support, bust support. This style laces in the front, but one of the questions I had about kirtles in the 15th century specifically was whether they can lace in other places. Yes, Side lacing is also often observed. So you have front lacing kirtles and you have side lacing kirtles. And the side lacing makes a lot of sense from the perspective of adjusting for pregnancies, right? If you're a woman in the Middle Ages, you're going to spend a large part of your adulthood being pregnant, whether or not the child actually comes to term. And that means that you're going to need to adjust your kirtle, right? You just don't have 20 kirtles in your closet, not even as a lower level noblewoman. Some of the queens, I will admit, definitely had that many kirtles in their closet based on their expense accounts. But even the average sort of mid-level noblewoman would only have, maybe 10 kirtles in her closet, in her trunks, not even her closet, her wardrobe. So yeah, what that means is that your kirtle needs to be adjustable for pregnancy. And while yes, front lacing allows some mobility in sizing around the waist, really when you put side lacing on both sides, then you have really complete extendability and controllability. And there's if you look at pictures, 15th century pictures of Mary and Anne embracing each other, the Virgin Mary and her mother Anne embracing each other, then you will actually see Anne, who's this amazingly old woman, is pregnant, and is she has nearly always she has a kirtle with side lacing on, and the laces are extended so that it can expand over her pregnant belly. Yeah. So this is spiral lacing, and I'm using a finger loop braided, as we would call it modernly, a finger loop braided lace, a bow of five, or a lace of 5 bows. It was not called finger loop braiding in medieval sources. It was called lace making, is what they called it. They called this lace. This was the original lace making before bobbin lace. This was lace making. And this one is designed to lace closed up to about the waist, and a little bit above the waist, it actually has an open gap. And so one of the other questions I had was about lacing that you see under the overgown, what was just called a gown in the 15th century. Someone asked if that lacing was holding the gown shut. It is not. Oh, and if you are one of my patrons or my channel members, I posted pictures for today's chat. So if you want to refer to the visual aids, you can just go check on the community post or in the patron on my Patreon page, and the pictures will be there so you can see examples of what I'm talking about. So there's a couple of great images that show women, ladies, noble ladies, queens, even in many cases, in various states of dress. And this gives us a visual idea of what these layers actually look like and how they went together. And there's a couple of really great ones that make it very clear that when you see a gown over top and there's laces, the neckline, the traditional Burgundian gown that's open, big open V, and then you see lacing underneath of it, that lacing is absolutely positively not the lacing of the gown. That's the lacing of the kirtle. And what you are seeing, you're like, but I see a solid color under there. Yes. So there's two basic kinds of kirtles in the 15th century. You have a kirtle where the lacing is visible, right? Like this one. And then there's another kind of kirtle where a stomacher goes underneath of the lacing and the kirtle doesn't shut. The kirtle, is very open. There's a great portrait of Margaret of York, which I included in the materials. And so basically this is a stomacher. That's what they're called in the 15th century. In the 15th century, Scots and English are called stomachers, or Scots, it's a stomach, but stomacher in 15th century English. And you find these in the expense accounts, and you find these in the inventories, right? So we know that the name for this, we know what they were made of. In Scotland, they're often lined in fur. And because that little ice age is ongoing, guys, it's getting really cold in Europe. And so you want your stomacher. The reason they started wearing these, my theory, is because it's getting colder and colder. And so they wanted something to to actually like be an extra layer to prevent cold air from getting through the gap in the laces. And so the stomacher was created. Men wore these too, especially in England and Scotland. We have lots of visual evidence and lots of documentary evidence of stomachers for men. Now, stomachers for women in France and Burgundy, absolutely, they're definitely being worn. But in France and Burgundy, you have the two options. So option one would be to put the stomacher over the top like this. And this is how I usually do it because I wear this as an undergown only. I never go out and about like this. But The second option is actually to put it underneath. And I'm actually I wanted to demonstrate that for you. So I need to unlace this. I got too excited about lacing. So this actually, you can see how easy it is to unlace a kirtle. Super easy. It's not hard. Comes undone really quickly. Everyone, people who don't wear medieval clothing or historical clothing often wonder, well, isn't it inconvenient? Doesn't it take a long time? No, it doesn't take, honestly, when you include hair and makeup that modern women do, it doesn't take any longer. Right. So when you put this in, you then need to pin it into place. Right. Oh, sorry, babies. My cats have all decided that they're going to lay in the places where I'm eventually going to be sitting and working because they're cats and they can detect where it is humans want to sit and put themselves there. So basically, you go ahead and you pin this into place. And then the other question I get, well, don't those pins then poke you? No. If you put them in properly, they will not poke you. Plus, there's layers and layers and layers of clothing that go with this, right? So it's not just like there's a pin straight against my skin. There's my smock underneath of it. There's the multiple layers of the kirtle. This pin, this isn't such a fine pin because medieval pins are not that fine. This one's not really designed for this, but this one is designed for jewelry. That's okay. Just wanted to give you an idea of this process. Okay, so there the stomacher is pinned in, and now I can go ahead and lace it shut. And so this will actually be not only something that will provide modesty by covering up the smock entirely. As you can see, the smock is vanished basically here. It also provides warmth, which also means I might not be keeping it on for the duration of this live stream. We are in the most insane heat wave here some of you know, I'm currently in Daegu, South Korea. And we are experiencing a hellish, and I'm not using that metaphorically, a hellish heat wave. It has been, for those of you in the Fahrenheit, it has not been less than 100 degrees here for a week. And the humidity is monsoon humidity, but it's a dry monsoon. So it's not actually raining like it's supposed to, which makes it extra miserable. So what that means is I don't want this extra insulating layer of silk velvet lined in silk. Because yeah, this is a silk velvet stomacher and it's backed in silk. And we know that is definitely one of the ways, at least, they were made, because in the household accounts of Margaret of Denmark, Queen of Scotland, the Queen consort of James III of Scotland, she has several stomachers and the materials are detailed. And they're often silk velvet, lined in silk, and then sometimes, as I said, furred, also lined in fur for extra warmth. So that, in the castle there in Stirling Castle, she would be comfortable. So I'm just lacing it up, and you can see there's no inconvenience about this, really. It's just fine, other than the fact that I can already feel the sweat coming on. It's effective. The insulating layer is effective. Can you show us how they dress up on the caveman era during summer days? The caveman era? Yeah. Okay. That's a very historically defined period, of course. People are still actually living in caves. That's not an insult. There are literally places around the world where people still have their homes in caves. Even in Spain, there are still people whose houses are actually caves that they've just kind of prettied up, made nice, and turned into a house. So caveman era would be no. Right. And as you see, if you look at the visual references I provided for my patrons and channel members, you can actually see that you can see the dark coming through here, right? Which you may or may not be able to see in this particular lighting. But this is how you create that. It's not a separate other garment necessarily. I'll talk about that in a moment, though. Right. And then you notice I just pulled one of the pins out. That's because I didn't pin it in the right place. So I pin it in to just kind of give it a place to hold on to. And then once I actually get it laced up, I can repin it to make sure it stays in place where I would like it to. Some people have asked me if, there should be hooks and eyes or something like that. And the answer is no. No hooks and eyes, because I tried hooks and eyes, actually. The very first stomachers I ever did when I started doing Burgundian clothing many years ago, I tried hooks and eyes. The problem is they're not adjustable. Once they're in place, they're in place. And so if there's any variability about how the garments are fitting you, about weight loss or weight gain, then you have to move the hooks and eyes, or you have to have multiple sets of hooks and eyes. And that just doesn't make sense from a medieval perspective. Yeah, so this is not a dark underdress. This is not an underdress, it's a stomacher, right? It's just one panel. Now, that being said, we know that they had these things called stomachers, but there's also another garment called a petticoat. And a petticoat is not what you might think of as a petticoat for those of you who are familiar with, say, clothing in the 18th or 19th century, right? Or modernly, what we call a petticoat for wedding dresses and whatnot. This is not a skirt at all. So remember, coat can mean dress or tunic, right? Originally, and it's the word coat, and it's a tunic, and it's only later on that in French it takes on the meaning of a dress, specifically this kind of dress. But it can also just have the general meaning of tunic. And we recently found, medieval story time, references to petticoats. And petticoats for men and petticoats for women. Lady Howard also had petticoats commissioned. And I think I figured out what the petticoats are based on the amount of fabric that's gone into them, how much they cost, and also a handy dandy 15th century Latin English dictionary. I mean, a dictionary from the 15th century that is Latin to English and English to Latin. And so petticoat is defined as a tunicula, and tunicula just means a little tunic, but I have to remind you that the word tunica in Latin is very general and doesn't necessarily mean the sort of geometrically constructed rectangular thing that you might be imagining. Doublets were also considered tunica in Latin in the 15th century, the way the word tunica is used in the sources in 15th century when they're using Latin instead of the lingua franca, right? So the petticoat seems to be a vest that goes down maybe on women. It seems to, because you can see these in some of the visual references I provided. They go down to about here. That's where they end. And then from the lacing down there, you can see the white of the smock, right? So it's definitely not an underdress. So it could be a stomacher like this that you're seeing, or it could be a petticoat. And the petticoat will actually basically, from what I can tell, will follow the lines of the kirtle in the bodice, right? It will basically be like just a bodice of a kirtle that laces, probably this laces on the side and on purpose, so that you don't have lacing on top of lacing and letting air in. You therefore have lacing on the front, or that gap there, right? And then the petticoat therefore laces on the sides. And therefore, you've got this multiple layers of insulation, and possibly also the petticoat might therefore also provide bust support for women. I'm not saying it does. I don't have evidence of that. It's a theory that it could be a bust support providing garment also for women in the 15th century. But what's really fascinating is that at the end of the 15th century, you start seeing the same thing in Florence. You see it in the portraits, and I provided some visual references for this. You see it in the portraits. If you look, and especially there's some Ghirlandaio portraits towards the 1490s, I think. You actually see that it's just the ladies in the Gomorrah, and there's this black line that goes to about here. And then from there down, you can see the white of the camicia. And this might be the thing that's called a busto in Lorenzo de' Medici's palace inventories, right? It's called a busto, and busto just means bodice. So maybe this busto is the Florentine version of the petticoat that is mentioned in 15th century inventories and expense accounts and dictionaries in England. Because petticoat, Lord Howard has petticoats made and Lady Howard has petticoats made. And it's basically, they're sleeveless. They're actually described as being without sleeves. And that totally makes sense. If you just want to keep yourself warm, but you don't want to bind yourself up with too many layers in the arms, right? Everyone knows there's a reason that you have these parka vests that people wear when they say go skiing, right? You just need the extra warmth over your trunk. You don't need it over everywhere. So I'm pretty certain that the busto in Florentine, I just had this realization last night, actually. I'm pretty certain that the busto that we see in the Florentine sources from the 15th century is the same as the petticoat that is mentioned in the 15th century sources. Now, remember, petticoat just means little coat, nothing to do with skirts. That word comes to, I don't know, I actually don't know when petticoat comes to actually mean skirt, but in the 15th century, there's no indication that it has anything to do with skirting. So, yeah. So this is, I know this laces up more than, I guess I've lost weight. I don't know. Anyway, this used to gap more, so there would be more of a gap. But this shows you the application of the stomacher, right, underneath here. And this is what you're seeing, therefore, when you, especially because some of the kirtles where the stomachers worn under the lacing often, they are actually open to here, and they have this V, right? Either all the way down to where it actually closes, or a V to the waist in the case of the one you see on Margaret of York in her very famous portrait that's in the Louvre, right? So when you see lacing on an gown, it's not the lacing of the gown that you're seeing, it's the lacing of the kirtle, not the gown. Yeah. Hello from Australia. How do you secure the lacing at the top so it doesn't undo? Oh, the lacing here. So interestingly, if you have it, this is not secured at all. I can secure it, but I don't have to, because if your lace is fatter, now remember, this is the finger loop braided lace, so it's flexible, right? So if your lace is, what I've discovered, if your lace is actually fatter than the holes, but remember, it has stretchability, it has flex and stretch. So if you're pulling on it, the lace gets thinner and it will go through the holes no problem. And then when you stop pulling on it, it fattens itself out again, and then it just stays. But the way, the times when you do see depictions of the top of the lacing, there's a couple of ways you see it done off. One is, go ahead and tighten the laces so I have this. One is to just loop it through itself. Sorry, not facing the camera, right? Loop it through itself like so, and then make a little half knot like that, right? And then that can either get tucked in or not, or actually do a full half knot like that, and then that gets tucked in, and it will just stay. It just does. Now, if your lace is thinner, like really thinner than the holes, then it might actually try to undo itself, but usually that's not a problem. And if your lace is actually this one, I'm actually using a removable bodkin, which may or may not be right for this particular era, but I need to actually have these laces pointed, and I don't have the equipment to point the laces here, right? So the trick is that at the bottom, if it's pointed, if it has a shape on the end, it's going to be a little hard to pull it back through the holes sometimes, depending on the shape. But if at the base you actually put a half shank knot that you can just, with a quick release, then you can actually unlace it from the bottom really easily, because the bottom won't have a point. Yeah, so that's a good question. Thank you, Helen. Right, so that's my answer to the question about the kirtle lacing, right? When you see lacing showing through the gown, through the V opening of the Burgundian gown, that isn't lacing, that's securing the gown. The gown doesn't need it. The gown will stay on without the lacing. It doesn't need any lacing. But what you're seeing is the lacing of a wide open fronted kirtle that has a stomacher underneath of it. So the stomachers weren't under the lacing, not over the lacing. And you can actually see that even this heavy, thick silk velvet stomacher doesn't really add too much bulk to a kirtle that wasn't designed to have it worn beneath it. I did not design this kirtle to be worn over a heavy silk velvet stomacher like this. Yeah. And there we go. Look, easy to pull out. Right. So yeah, so everyone who wants to get a look at this, yeah, you can see where the velvet has naturally crushed going under my Burgundian, the wide belt, my armor and castings, my super wide belt that you see in my getting dressed videos. For those of you who aren't on YouTube, if you go to YouTube, I have a really excellent full getting dressed video on getting dressed in the whole ensemble from the skin out, narrated in a very witty way with lots and lots of fun information taken from primary sources. And that's, you can see the crushing, the crush effect. That's just natural from having a really heavy belt over it. So when I get dressed in this kirtle, normally I wear this over top because it isn't a wide opening kirtle. So the stomacher goes over top of it like this, and then the gown goes over top of that. And then what you see in the V is this beautiful black silk velvet. Yeah. Let me see. Thank you. Helen says, thank you. That makes so much sense. Also perfect timing for the roaches information I was puzzling over in the gap in my little last night and how to fill it. I'm going to assume that autocorrect had its way with you there because I'm pretty certain you're not talking about roaches. I understand what you mean though. Yeah, so those are the two options for the stomacher. Stomacher can go over like this, and there's a great depiction. And I'm so sorry, patrons and channel members, I forgot to include this picture. I meant to. In King Renee's Book of Love, there's a fantastic depiction, a sequence. It's like a narrated, like what we would call a comic book, actually. But it's a dream journey. And King Renee goes on this dream journey in search of love. And he shows in one of the scenes, he meets up with two of, I forget who the ladies are exactly, these two ladies, and they need a ride to their island. And in the first scene, when they're on mainland, they're all fully dressed with miters and veils and gowns and belts, jewelry, the whole 9 yards. And then in the next scene, they're on the ship and they've taken off their gowns because it's obviously hot and perhaps inconvenient to sail in a gown if you're actually doing something on the ship. And what you see then is their kirtles, their front lacing kirtles that actually don't lace shut all the way, probably indicating that the kirtles were made for them when they were younger and skinnier, and they've now, rounded out a little bit. But you actually see the stomacher over top of the chest area like this. It's a narrower stomacher than mine is. I need a deeper one because I've got such a long torso. Anyway, you can see the stomacher pinned over top of the kirtle there. And then you see the laces of the kirtle continuing out from underneath of where the stomacher is stopped. Right, so that's how we know. We really know. There's no question in my mind that what you are seeing is either that stomacher as depicted in King Renee's Book of the Tournament or a petticoat, as I've just described. Yeah. Yeah. Don't forget to like and subscribe, everyone. Thank you for joining today. So any questions about the kirtle that I haven't already addressed? That was what I had. I'm pretty certain that is all I wanted to talk about the kirtle. Let me just look at my notes. Kitties, I swear to God, the kitties have, like a liquid, have managed to fill every space available on my settee behind me. Yeah, so just so you all know, I actually prepare for these by taking notes on things I'd like to discuss to remind myself so that if I get wrapped up in a discussion, I actually come back to the topic. Right, no, there was two more things I wanted to talk about the kirtle. Okay, so this kirtle is a 4-seam kirtle. It's got a side seam on each side. Stop! My ornery little kitty there, can you see her? Yeah. She keeps reaching out as lazily as possible and grabbing my kirtle with her little claws. And I mean as lazy as possible. Like she literally is just sticking her paw out, holding the claws out and letting the skirts catch. No, bad kitty, no biscuit. Don't look at me with your cutesy eyes. Okay, so 2 seams, side seams, seam in the front, seam in the back. Pretty standard affair. And there's an extant gown. There's a couple of extant gowns from the 15th century across various parts of Europe. There's Queen Margaret's golden gown, which the dating of that is kind of questionable, but it's just like this. It's 4 panels. Beata Osana's bodice is of Hergamora is 4 panels, right? So we know for certain that a 4-panel construction is 100% authentic and was used in the 15th century. We know it because we have extant garments. Art aside. But in the materials I provided to my patrons and channel members, there's a picture of the very famous painting of Agnès Sorel, who was the mistress of Charles VII of France, famed beauty of the 15th century. Very famous portrait. The portrait of her wearing the blue kirtle where it's open in the front and her strangely apple-shaped breast is like almost popping off of her chest in this perfectly horizontal fashion, perpendicular to her body. And she's so eerily pale as to be almost gray. Right? Very famous portrait. But if you look closely, there's something very curious about the kirtle. Her kirtle has seams that go all the way from the shoulder, all the way across the center of both breasts, and all the way down through her waist and all the way down through the skirts. So if that is reflected in the back as well, that would actually make it that would actually take the side seams from the side and move them to center fronts or off center fronts and off center back possibly. Now that would also actually allow for more sophisticated, more granular shaping in the breasts. Now what we don't know, and I don't think you can tell from that portrait, is whether there's also side seams. So whether it's a 6 panel with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 seams, or just 4 seams with the seams kind of rotated, right? But the over the breast seams was the question I received. Do I think that that was the artist's fancy, or do I think that was a reflection of an authentic practice? Because of course, I've looked at hundreds of pictures of women in kirtles from the 15th century, and I have never seen an over the breast seam in any other portraits. So the tendency there is to assume, well, okay, no one else has over the breast seams. This must therefore be the artist's fancy. But I don't think so. Jean Fouquet produced some of the most realistic portraiture and artwork of the 15th century. And I made a post, if you want to go check out my recent posts about the court jester Pietro Gonella, who was a jester in the court of the Este. That painting has now been attributed to Jean Fouquet. And the realism in the detail is shocking because it actually makes you feel like you're in the room with this amazing man. And so I don't think that Jean Fouquet was in the habit of being fantastical for the sake of being fantastical. So I don't think that's the case here. I think it is perfectly reasonable that you could make a kirtle in that fashion because we actually do know, at least reflected in the artwork, there are certainly different ways to construct a kirtle, including the bodice and the sleeves. So if you look at Van der Weyden, yes, Van der Weyden, if you look at Van der Weyden's kirtles on his Mary Magdalene, and then one of the other, it might be Veronica, but it also might be another Mary Magdalene in his altarpieces. They have yet a completely different way of putting their kirtles together, complete with a raglan sleeve seam, so that the sleeve is the neckline here. There is no separate neckline, and there's no round arm's eye. It's just a raglan, a diagonal seam like this, into which the sleeve is set. So I provided those visuals as well, because that's yet another way to possibly put together a kirtle. So I don't think there was one true way. I think there were possibly 3 ways that kirtles could be constructed, and I'm not going to rule out the over the breast seam. It is not, however, a princess seam. Princess seam, the Queen of Heaven being depicted with a princess seam. No. But it's not a princess seam, by which I mean it's not a dart, right? So it might actually be a princess seam if princess seams go all the way to the skirt. But this is not a dart. It's very depicted as a seam that goes all the way down through the skirts, right? From the shoulders all the way down. So it's basically a whole separate panel. So I personally think that's a perfectly legitimate option. And the thing is that we don't actually have that many portrait quality depictions of women in their kirtles. The majority of depictions of women in their kirtles are in miniatures in illuminated text. And so what that means is that the level of granular detail is just not going to be the same as it would be in a portrait or in an altarpiece. But when we do have portraits and altarpieces, the few that have survived anyway, or of which we know that have survived, right? Then you get those kinds of details of things that we might think are strange or they weren't done, but then you start looking and you realize, oh gosh, maybe it was actually done. So I actually have been thinking about doing a version of a kirtle constructed in the style of Agnès Sorel's kirtle, God rest her soul. So, I personally think it's a fine approach. There are some people who say if only one artist depicted it, it can't have been real. Okay, and that's a gate you can keep for your own group. But for my purposes, I don't see why they wouldn't have thought of doing that. I mean, the gowns that they found in Greenland have all kinds of crazy seams and shaping all over the place. right? So there's no reason that Agnès Sorel's gown could not be done the same way. So that's my opinion on the over the breast seam. It isn't just a dart. It's certainly not a dart, but it's a seam that goes all the way down. And in terms of construction of garments and, achieving width of skirt, it makes sense because fabrics were not as wide back then as they are now. So using multiple panels to create wider skirts also makes sense from that perspective, not just shaping in the bodice, but also providing shaping in the skirt. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that was all I meant to say. And then the rest we can get to once I finish getting dressed and get sewing, because I'm not done yet. Okay, so next step for me anyway, and as we learned in story time with the creative Contessa, when I did a reading about the Chamberlain's duties and the Chamberlain dressing their sovereign, remember that the hair was not done until the sovereign, as it's called in the 15th century English, was dressed to the mid layer, to this underlayer, to the kirtle in the case of a woman, or a doublet in the case of a man. So, and that should also include stockings. This is because, no doubt, I'm pretty certain that they wanted their sovereign to not catch their death by being naked while their hair was done and being cold. So these are cloth, cut out of cloth. There's yet another pair. These are linen, and they are blue. Blue woad is actually one of the colors that is easy to dye, in which it is easy to dye linen. Other colors, linen won't hold on to. Linen will hold on to blue. It will hold on to woad blue. It will naturally and easily take saffron yellow. It will not naturally and easily hold on to other colors. So we do have evidence of blue linen in the 15th and the 16th century, and cut linen stockings are the way to go in the 15th century. You can also have them out of wool. It is monsoon season here in Korea, so I'm not wearing wool stockings today. Actually, my wool stockings are fine, except in terms of heat, they're actually not that bad. But linen is better at evaporative cooling than wool is. So they go on, and of course, they're cut on the bias. They're cut on the bias, so they have some natural stretch and shaping. They're not just bags, but they still do need the aid of a garter to hold them up. And yes, everyone, garters were practical at once upon a time. They weren't just some extra fun frilly thing you could add on to your your nighttime wardrobe for more scintillating experiences in the bedroom. So yeah, these were actually meant to hold up your stockings, men and women. Now they didn't hold up men's stockings so much as they kept them from bagging, because up until they started making this really, especially the linen ones, but up until they started making a specialized wool hairpino that has a natural stretch to it and that creates that painted on look that you see in 15th century art. Up until that point, they were being cut out of wool on the bias or linen on the bias, and there would be some sagging, especially around the knees, where the knee is constantly bending on men's chausses, and then you get this nasty saggy effect. So men started wearing, at some point, they started also wearing garters around their calves to prevent that sag from translating all the way down to their feet. Garter. These garters are leather, but we have lots of evidence of woven garters, of tablet woven garters. And there's some finger loop braids that would absolutely make a wide enough, especially made out of the right materials, would make a wide enough narrow wear to function as a garter, 100%. I know because I've made them. Okay, so stocking achieved, feet are covered, belt comes on next. In the case of ladies wear belts, two sets of belts usually. They wear a belt with their kirtles, and then they wear a belt over their gown. The belt on their kirtle is actually a practical belt. It's the one that has their purses and their tools and their equipment that they might need throughout their day. This is a demescent, a semi-belt, a half belt, so what that translates to. And that's because it doesn't meet all the way. It closes, partially here, and then it's open. This belt is super great if you're constantly going in and out of stages of pregnancy and your hips are getting bigger and thinner and bigger and thinner, because it's completely adjustable and you don't have to worry about extra holes, which then have to have metal grommets set into them, right? It's completely adjustable with this chain. So I can make it sit really low on my hips, like that. I can make it sit higher on my hips, like that. So completely adjustable. Very good idea, but the idea doesn't seem to come about until the 15th century for whatever reason. This is not an armor and castings belt set, but they do have lots of demoscent belt sets in their collection. This was purchased from a Polish caster at a Battle of Nations event in 2013. Right. So this is my aumônière, and it's hung from a purse hanger like this. This is knit, and we do have examples of knit pouches starting in Spain as early as the 12th century, extant ones anyway. And then that is one of the knit items that is absolutely documentable up to in England as well. There's extant pieces of knit pouches. This one was knit specifically for me. So it's got the little gold fleur-de-lis and then the beautiful hand-dyed red wool. Very nice. Okay, now we get to hair. And I did promise you last time that I would show you how a medieval comb works. So this is a medieval comb, right? It's got fine tines on one side and larger tines on the other. And this side is for getting the knots out first. And then this side has two possible functions. One, it will really help condition your hair because it's going to distribute the oils, natural oils from your scalp all throughout the hair. The second use is for nitpicking. So this side is a louse comb, a knit comb as they were called. So Mistress V, welcome. Thank you. So this is how, and everyone says, oh my gosh, aren't you breaking and damaging your hair? No, I'm not any more than a hairbrush. So this was a part of the hair care process. This was actually part of cleansing your hair because the fine tines and the wood, even if it's ivory, the same thing would apply, actually clean out your hair. It literally removes the detritus from the air that has acquired on your hair. Fine particles, dust, soot, if I had been working around a fire, right? And you see and I've got curly hair, I've got wavy, too curly hair that tends towards the dry side. And even still, it's very easy to comb my hair. And I have not yet combed or brushed my hair today. I slept in braids and I undid the braids specifically for this. So, I mean, my hair is not super naughty, but still. Now, this is with the broad side, and probably they would purposefully drag the comb along their scalp, which will also help clean your scalp, by the way. And then the fine side. Yeah, nitpicking, that is martello. That is literally where the word nitpicking comes from. You are absolutely right. This is the origin of the term nitpicking. So if I had nits, then I would be nitpicking. Thankfully, I don't. Nor do my cats. Oh, the babies are passed out. Oh, goodness, they're so cute. They're gonna get real unhappy here in a moment. But probably you can't see, unfortunately. I can see the dust and particles from the air that just this little bit of combing has done. Of course, you don't just comb just to get the knots out. You comb longer. The longer you comb, the more you distribute the natural oils from your scalp across your hair, the nicer your hair actually gets. Right? And this is why there are no recipes. This is going to shock you. There are recipes for hair care, for all sorts of hair care in medieval pharmaceutical manuals and manuals on beauty, but none of them are to soften or detangle hair. There's hair wash, there's ways to dye your hair, there's ways to bleach your hair, there's ways to remove nits from hair chemically, but there's no conditioner. And I think that's because when you're not constantly washing your hair and stripping the oils, and when you use a comb like this this is it, then your hair just actually naturally conditions and stays nice and silky and doesn't need any extra assistance to not knot on itself. That's my theory. You see how shiny it gets, right? From the combing. Okay, now other side. And here you can see the difference. See, Now this is fresh out of braids, mind you, so I guess it kind of looks nice in the camera. It doesn't look as nice not in the camera, ironically. Anyway, so this is my freshly combed hair with a medieval comb, right? A nice 15th century comb. And this is not yet combed. So let's go ahead and tack the other side. I sleep in braids too. I use a boar bristle. Yeah, so it's interesting. Boar bristle brushes existed in the Middle Ages, but not for human hair. We have some extant ones that have been found, but there's zero evidence of them being used on humans. They were apparently used on horses. And also boar's bristle brushes were used for scrubbing, for cleaning, but not for hair. It seems not for human hair. I don't know when the switch. I think I theorized on this last week, and I'm sticking by this theory even though I didn't look further into it. That when we started delving into hairstyles that required different, more nuances, that were specifically adding volume to the hair, for instance, maybe that's when brushes came about and started being used instead of combs. But I don't. That's my theory right now, anyway. Yeah. So, yeah, the combs were a love token, by the way, in the Middle Ages. A lot of the combs that have survived, if you look at the carving on them, you're going to see a lot of lovers motifs, little hearts, or even like literally little lovers carved into them. So they were an acceptable love token, and you'll learn about that in my upcoming video on medieval rings, where I do talk about courtly love and the rules of love in the Middle Ages. But it literally, these were one of the approved forms of love token. So if you have an eye for someone and you'd like to give them a gift that isn't creepy, give them a nice carved comb. So I've got some fun books for you all today in the book corner, and I'm going to do some mini readings from two of them, just as a kind of taster on what story time with the Contessa is like, but also to make you want to go and read these books. there's some there's some amazingly judgmental comments in one of the books I have on art, that the commentary alone is worth reading the book because the whole thing is just one big length of snarky art history for the win. The irony is, I don't think they meant to be snarky for the sake of snarky. I think that's just how this art historian is. Okay, and then switch it around to the other side. Yeah, I haven't used a brush in years. I've been using combs pretty much for only years. So this, I some of you know, I'm big on trying to encourage sustainable lifestyle, working towards that. I'm not perfect at it. I don't mean that, and I don't judge anyone else, because it's a journey and it's a spectrum. But I try not to have two sets of things. If I have a medieval thing that works just fine in my modern life, then I use the medieval thing. I don't have a medieval replica and a modern version. Combs are one of them. I have my medieval combs and I use them in my hair on a daily basis. And as you can see, it really does make the hair nice and shiny. Like, I haven't washed my hair in a couple of days. And the only reason I wash my hair actually is because I live in a city where there's a lot of air pollution, which that medieval people wouldn't have encountered of the kind. They would have had soot. There would have been soot in the air, no doubt about it. But we've got other kinds of crap in the modern world that medieval people didn't have to deal with in the air. Right. So yeah, here we go. Combed down, and that was with the fine tines. Did you hear me scream in pain? No, it actually feels nice. Let me tell you, I really enjoy the feeling of the tines of the comb scraping across my scalp. I could literally have my damsels, I could just sit there all day, every day, and just have my damsels comb my hair. And that would be it. That's all I would do. I would die of malnutrition because I wouldn't care about eating. I would just be happy to have someone just combing my hair. And as I said, I'm intentionally scraping the tines across my scalp so that it catches those oils from my scalp. It catches the oils from my scalp and distributes them across the entire length of the shaft. Now, I do actually have to wash the comb. I do actually eventually have to wash the tines of the comb. Yeah, Martello, brake dust is everywhere, 100%. Absolutely. Amongst so many other horrible things. Okay. So you see actually, here. You can actually see, you see the fuzzies? See the fuzzies in my hair? That's what's been cleaned out of my hair by this comb, right? Voila. So, yes, medieval women did absolutely wash their hair. We know it because we have depictions of it and we have recipes for hair wash. Uh, not it wasn't called shampoo, it was called a wash for hair basically. So, for hair wash, but they did not have to do it that often, right? Because when you have a comb like this, then you don't need it. Okay. Here. Hair all combed. What do we think? Yes, well, don't get used to it. I'm about to braid it up or get rid of do something else with it anyway. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do then, I'm actually going to put it in a ponytail today, a 15th century ponytail. And so we actually, it can be really hard to know. Don't forget to hit that. Oh yeah, thank you. No, those are not knits. Those are definitely not knits. That's just fuzz. That's just dirt from the air. Okay, so actually, because I'm not going to be putting it in two braids because I'm going to put it up in a ponytail, I need to do something else with my hair now. So it can be hard to know how 15th century French, Burgundian, and English women actually did their hair because unfortunately, even when they're depicted bathing, their heads are covered. So we don't really know what kind, it's hard to know actually what kind of updo these women were doing to put their hair up. We know they were putting their hair up. They're under their hats, they're under their headdresses. We just don't know exactly what that looked like. But we do see young ladies wearing only the first layer or two of the headdress, usually girls or young teens or prepubescent teens, and their hair is in a ponytail on the back, on the point of their head, like up here. Okay. And I'm actually going to use finger lip braiding. So this is a green dourish that I made. It's made out of cotton and linen, actually cotton and linen thread. And we actually do have some extant cotton and linen finger loop braiding laces from Langberg Castle. They part of the trove of things they found there were laces, were finger loop braids made out of hemp, linen, and cotton. And so to do this on myself, I'm actually going to just help keep the hair in order. To help keep the hair in order, I'm going to just twist it, make it easier for me to do this on myself. And then I'm just going to cross the finger loop braid around on itself, and then tie it. Yeah, and then tie it. Now, this is me doing this on myself. Normally, I would have damsels to do this, but this is what I call a quick and dirty self ponytail, right? And the nice thing about finger loop braiding out of cotton or linen or hemp is that, unlike silk, it self adheres, right? So it just holds itself in place. A little half knot like that, and I should be good to go. And then I'm just going to take the tail and pull it open to make it a little bit tighter. Okay. Okay. Now it could be that from here, some kind of bun is made. And I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, again, we don't know because we almost never see real women, not fantastical women or legendary women or etc., with their hair uncovered enough for us to actually see what's going on there. So who knows? This could be realistic or not. And I'm going to take a second finger loop braid and tie it around the bun like this to secure the bun in place. Now, there is some evidence of hairpins, but I don't have the right kind of hairpins. The hairpins that we have, we think they're hairpins anyway, that have survived from the Middle Ages are these big U's. They're like there we go. Be like this, trying to figure out how to let you see what's going on here. Right, so I made a ponytail and then I twisted the tail of the pony, twisted it until it wrapped around the base of the ponytail. And then I took a second finger loop braid and basically bound it in place. Now, this is quick and dirty. Obviously, if I had my damsels, it would probably be better. But it's going to get covered here in a moment, so I care less about it. Okay. Next step. Next step is the coif. So this is actually, we call it a coif modernly, but in 15th century English, we're pretty certain it was called a kerchief. I've never seen the word coif mentioned in 15th century inventories for anything in English, for anything relating to women. And in 15th century French expense accounts, I have found one reference to a coif for the Duchess of Burgundy, made of silk. Not what, I have no idea what it is. It literally said coiffe de soie. So that could be, who knows what that coif was in particular, but couvre-chef is mentioned a whole lot in the French accounts, and cover-chef or kerchief or couvre-kerchief, there's again 20 different spellings in 15th century English mentioned a lot. So this is what I call a winged kerchief. Some people call this a milkmaid coif, and I will acknowledge that. That's what I call the workshop that I offer, because I teach workshops, like live via Zoom on making these. Just finished one. I'll be offering another one in September after Penzic. And so I'll lean into that, and I'll call the workshop a milkmaid coif workshop, but it's not. Milkmaids are not the only ones who wore these, right? Oh, so let me explain what's happening. So I put it on like this, and then the sort of what I refer to as the kerchief part. Got two parts. You've got the frontlet and you've got the kerchief part. I just take this and I twist it, counter twist in towards my neck on both sides. And I can feel as I do that, you can see and feel it tightening across the back, the base of your skull. So you'll feel that happening and you'll know it's the right amount of tightness. Okay, so then we bring it up here and we tie it in a knot like this. And then, if you want to be sassy, you can just leave the tails like that. Or if you want to be less sassy, which there seems to be both options, you can tuck them in like that. So that's what it looks like. And then from there, I can either leave the frontlet like this, framing my face in this manner, but also this is practical. If I'm outside, if I were actually outside doing something in the sun, having this actually, keeps the sun off of my face a little bit and out of my eyes. So it actually reduces glare. Or I can fold it back like that. And there we go. Yeah. Okay, final thing. I am going to bling up a little bit today just to make the snobby reenactors angry on purpose. Kitties. Kitties. What did you do with the collar? Okay, maybe I'm not going to bling up. Literally, the collar has vanished. I think the cat's sitting on it. Are you sitting on the collar? Okay, collar's gone. I'm not going to be collaring up today, so you're going to get the relatively plain Contessa. Okay, are there any questions about the ensemble before we move on to the sewing part where I actually sew? Yeah, so this is what it looks like from the back. So I am dressed in what I call if I were to go outside, I'd be mistaken for a peasant or a serving woman or an alewife or something like that. But in the privacy of my own chambers with my closest companions, and you, dear viewer, today you are my closest courtiers and companions. Yeah, this kerchief is great. Let me tell you, I wear this kerchief modernly too. No, not because of any religious nonsense, but because it's so practical, right? Like, you saw the amount of effort I put into my hair. Like, I can do that in 3 minutes. Don't have to worry about styling. Don't have to worry about product. Just cover it up and go. And in fact, I didn't have to put it in a bun. I could have just made a wad of hair and put this over top of it, and the effect would be the same. I was just trying to do the actual hairstyle for you so you could actually see the process of combing and making a conjectural 15th century bun using 15th century materials and supplies. But I didn't have to. I could literally have just shoved the hair into the back of this and twisted it up, and it would have worked well too. Yeah. Couvre-chef, just called a kerchief, actually, not a head kerchief. Just a couvre-chef, because remember, sheaf means head. That's where the word comes from. Couvre-chef, kerchief, means cover the head. So a head kerchief is a head cover head. uh, yeah, is it very secure? Oh, this, yeah, this kerchief, man, I do everything in this, right? Dancing, um, running around. Look, and for more security, like if I slide it, obviously, if you put it more forward, then it's even more secure, right? See, secure as hell. um, Deodorant. So there is actually a recipe for a deodorant in the Trotula, and I'm going to be doing readings for medieval story time this coming week. I will be doing readings from the Trotula, so we'll be reading through some of the recipes for skincare and body care products that medieval people used. Yeah, there's a couple of things that they used, although they call it to make the body smell sweet. So it's not necessarily deodorant like we would think of it. It's usually it's a combination of herbs. Lavender is amongst them, and sage, and ground together, and then usually soaked in water, so you make an extract. Um, not no distilling, no distilling, so not that kind of extract. And then those are sprinkled about their body, and they would also actually put they talk about actually putting herbs, sweet smelling spices in their hair, and then combing them through the hair. And there's a recipe for a compound of different kinds of spices like cinnamon and cloves and nutmeg and galangal, I think, actually. And you grind that together, and then you're supposed to sprinkle that in your hair, and then you're supposed to comb it through your hair. And those kind of spices, yeah, they would definitely make you smell sweet. So what medieval people thought of as smelling sweet was what we might think of as smelling like apple pie or pumpkin pie, actually. Yeah. Okay. Oh God. Okay. So we're now going to switch into sewing mode for me. And maybe you guys are already sewing, but I just want you to appreciate the situation that's facing me back here on my settee. Little babies. I have to sit and sew now, so you just have to make just a little bit of room. Not much. Okay. Readjusting for sewing time. Little babies. Oh my goodness. They're so sleepy. Okay, so I thought I would talk about also one of my latest projects. I did a video on this if you want up close shots of everything. There is a video pretty much on all the platforms at this point, I would expect, of no, why are you biting on it? What are you doing? Okay, I have delved into making historical Korean clothing finally. So I am making starting with the underlayers, right? The layers that you need to start with. I am making a pair of dansokot, dansokot, which means literally the over undergarment, over underclothes. And it's actually, I can't remember too. I should have done this before. So this is basically what modern people might think of as culottes. It's made of hemp. It's geometric construction. So there's a rectangular gore in the crotch area, and then two giant rectangles of hemp that will then be pleated into a band at my waist. And then this will create the bulk that the chima goes through. So if you want to check out the details on the latest project, just check out the late video I just published. I also published pictures of up close of the stitches and the seams and everything if you want to see what that looks like. So this is one of my current projects. Yeah. So I am actually going to be working, one of the things on which I'm going to be working today, therefore, is the waistband. So this is hemp. This is linen. And I'm going to openly confess that linen is not an authentic fabric for historical Korean garments. They had rami and they had hemp. Those were their plant fibers of choice. Unfortunately, I do not have any more of this hemp, and it's 100+ degrees outside plus humidity, so I'm not going back to the market anytime soon. Which also means our market tour, guys, is going to get postponed. The market is not air conditioned, and it's 100 degrees feels like 110 outside. So I'm just not. We'll wait until the weather gets a little more amenable for the market tour. So that means that I want this pair done. This is my first ever pair, so I'm okay with using a linen band because I just don't have any more ramie or hemp that would be the right color, because this is the layer that's going to get laundered, just like in medieval Europe, right? You've got the linen layers, the ones that get laundered. So I don't want to use like a nice silk band. I don't want to use um, some color of silk, especially that would then bleed into the garment. So I do have some Korean silk, and I do have Korean ramie, but they're all dyed very dark colors. And if I use that as a waistband on this and then laundered them, then I'd end up with a tie-dyed set of tang soko. So we're just going with a linen band for the waist. Yeah. Sub museum tour for the market. No, that's not a bad idea. Maybe. Would you all be interested in a live stream tour? Another, for some of you, live stream tour of the Daegu National Museum and their historical Korean clothing collection? If so, just let me know, and I can make that happen. Although that still involves me going outside to get there. It's pretty gruesome here these days. I'll just say that. It's very, very hot. I grew up without air conditioning, a 3-story house with no air conditioning, so I can tolerate it, but it's not necessarily my favorite thing. I won't die. It's just I'd rather not. Also, when it gets this hot, cities, I'm in a city, I'm in a large city, and cities that get this center hemp chat. Yeah, no kidding. That's okay. I'm okay with this substitution. One, it's going underneath of all the garments, and two, it is a cellulose fiber, so it fits with the spirit of the original material. Koreans just, I don't know why they didn't have linen. I haven't looked into why linen was not something that was here in Korea. I mean, I know they had linen. I'm not certain where the linen line is, what I would call the linen line. Ah, yes, yes to the museum tour. I have already done one, but I'm definitely happy to go back. And in fact, I might be going back as an official researcher. So for those of you who don't know, I have made contact with one of the premier experts in historical Korean fashion, Dr. Minji Kim, and I was asking her questions about things, and she said to me, no one has actually researched these clothes in the level of depth you're talking about, because I wanted to know about construction details. I wanted to know about seams and finishes and order of operations, like which layers got sewn together first, what came next. And she said, actually, for the majority of garments, no one has studied it at that level. That's not how people have been examining these garments. This would be a great course of research for you to take, and then you could present your research findings. And so I have a meeting with her on Monday. We're going to be talking about the shape of that research and how to proceed. She offered to co-author with me, even, so that I just have a lowly little bachelor's degree. I don't have a master's, or God forbid a doctorate. So she's offered to co-author with me, to lend some credence to my research findings. But also, I'm hoping she's going to have connections for me to go into the museums where these original extant medieval Korean garments are, and I can actually touch them and look at them and examine them. Because how else am I going to do research on how they're put together if I'm not examining them firsthand? So it is possible that I may soon, and I'm hoping to get permission maybe from these various museums to actually take you all with me live, so you can see what I'm seeing and what I'm doing, at least for part of it. I'm hoping Korea really loves when Westerners take an interest in their historical and/or traditional clothing. So I'm hoping that the museums look at this as a way to get the word out to the world about the beauty of historical Korean clothing and the rich cultural and historical treasures that Korea has to offer to non-Koreans. So I'm hoping this works out. I'll keep you apprised. Meeting is on Monday, my time, Sunday for Americas. Yeah. So we will see. Yeah, it's pretty fantastic. I'm pretty excited. The 15th century in Korea is a really amazing time culturally, and in terms of social justice and social reform. So, it is, and I spend a lot of my time in Korea, and their clothing is gorgeous, and their, the layers. I'm a layer kind of girl. I love wearing layers. I love having skirts that drag on the ground. I love all of that. So, yeah. Oh, one more thing about kirtles I wanted to mention, fabrics for kirtles. So this kirtle is made of linen, and I unfortunately have found zero evidence of linen kirtles in the 15th century. Now, I have evidence of kirtles of linen in the 16th century, but not the 15th century. So this is conjectural as a material choice on many, many levels. Red linen, for one, could be dyed matter. This is certainly a matter red, so it's hypothetically possible, but linen is known for not being, for linen is known that it is known that dyes with linen tend to be fugitive, meaning that they literally flee, they go away. They fade out very, very quickly. So I can't actually say that this was, in fact, a material out of which kirtles would have been made. However, we do know from expense accounts and inventories that kirtles were definitely made of various grades of wool, including the finest wool, scarlet. We know they were also made at the top levels of society, i.e., queens and duchesses. They were made of cloth of gold. Yes, this thing that goes under the gown. Yes, you heard me right. Made of cloth of gold, made of damask, made of silk velvet, made of so called plain silk, made of satin. All of these super rich materials, these kirtles were also made out of those. So not just even though yes, it's meant to be worn underneath, conspicuous consumption is when you inconspicuously wear the most conspicuously consumed items in your wardrobe. It's like someone who owns a Lamborghini but only drives it on their private estate so no one else ever gets to see it. Like that's the medieval equivalent of that, is having a kirtle made out of cloth of gold that no one ever gets to see. But this leads credence to the idea then when you see in, especially in altarpieces and crucifixion scenes, if you look, you'll often see women who are depicted wearing multi layers of gowns, as they should be. The overlayer is hiked up, and the overlayer is a scarlet, which is not a color. It's a very fine, it's Melton wool, right? It's that really fine satin like wool weave. And they're wearing that as the overgarment, but their kirtle is like this amazing cloth of gold, and you can see the skirt of their kirtle. And everyone, I used to think until I started reading these inventories, that's just artist fancy, right? They're trying to show that this is definitely not a modern woman. This is some fancy schmancy biblical saint or whatever. Oh, but it isn't, because here we have um, Margaret of Denmark with all of her cloth of gold kirtles. We have Cecily Neville with her cloth of gold and damask kirtles. We have Charlotte, Queen of France, Charlotte of Savoy, the Queen of France, with all of her damask and cloth of gold kirtles. So they're Scotland, England, France, and unfortunately, I don't have expense accounts for Margaret of York because those burnt down during the French Revolution. Fuck you, French revolutionaries! You ruined so much about France. It's about French culture and French history. Anyway, excuse my language. I get a little upset when people purposefully burn archives to the ground. It's one thing when it accidentally happens, it's another thing when you do it on purpose, which the French revolutionaries did. Anyway, so yeah, if you would like to make your kirtle out of the fanciest, schmanciest, most expensive $1,000 meter fabric, you do it, because that is absolutely a medieval approach to kirtles. And what's that I hear you asking? Do I plan on making a kirtle or three out of silk damask? Yes, I do. And I do have the silk damask in my stores. It's been a little difficult these last couple of years for various reasons for me to get my full creative on, and also access to the supplies and workspace I need. But hopefully that will be changing soon. So yes, plans are in the works for a lovely damask kirtle and a silk velvet kirtle and all of the ways I can possibly be 15th century conspicuously consumptive. Yeah, that is definitely in the works. So what I'm doing now, I'm actually working on the waistband for my tansokot, and I'm just doing stab stitches in silk thread. silk thread is authentic for historical Korean garments. And this is actually Korean silk embroidery thread. So it is a Korean product, even though it's not certainly a reproduction product per se. But we do know from the extant textiles that here in Asia, they were certainly able to spin very, very, very fine silk thread because silk itself comes off in basically pre-made, pre-ready to go, right? Silk filaments. For those of you who've never seen how silk is made, go to YouTube and look up um, any just do silk how silk is made, and you will. For those of you who've never seen it, you're going to be shocked at actually how easy silk processing is compared to other fiber choices. It basically comes ready made, so it's easy to make fine silk thread. Less easy to make, say, fine linen thread and fine wool thread. Much less easy. Oh, Tommy, baby. Was it a hard night? Did you have a hard night? Yeah. I know because I came out this morning and someone had broken into the kitty food, and taken out one of the fillets of chicken and taken it to my nice Korean borio, the traditional silk Korean mattress, and chewed through the plastic and eaten the chicken on the silk borio. That's what I found this morning when I got up. Were remnants of chicken all over the silk mattress. Yeah, that's my life. How do I like living in Asia? Love it. I've traveled all over Asia. I've lived in and out of Korea a lot over the last 11 years at this point, and I love living in Korea. It's great. Really one of my preferred countries of residence. It's safe, it's clean, it's super high tech. Public transit is cheap and reliable and safe and clean. There are public bathrooms everywhere that are nice and clean. There's great food, there's great culture, there's great history, there's fantastic hiking, even here in the city. Within 10 minutes, from my downtown Daegu, within 10 minutes of walking, I can be hiking up a beautiful mountain that overlooks the city. And that's pretty much all of Korea. So I don't have to drive anywhere to go see beautiful things. I can just walk out my door and see nature or go see historical buildings. And it's cosmopolitan enough that, if I don't feel like going out for Korean food, there's plenty of other culinary options right here in town. So no, and Koreans, at least here in Daegu, they're super friendly. Everyone's really nice to me, very warm and welcoming. So yeah, I love living in Asia. It's also easy to travel around Asia, especially from Seoul. The airport is super well connected. And, you know, airlines here still give a crap. They still treat their customers really wonderfully. Yeah, Takeda, the kitties have been super naughty. They have. Uh, is Korea better than the USA? For me, absolutely, 100%. I can't. Better is almost too personal to say for everyone, but for me, Korea is definitely a better fit than the USA. But honestly, I'm going to say for me, most places are a better fit than the USA at this point. I expatriated when I was 22 and went to study at the University of Heidelberg. And then I stayed and lived in Germany for 12 years and worked my happy German life. Then we moved to Korea. Then we spent another year back in the USA. I wasn't too happy about that. Then we were back in Korea. Then we spent another 2 years in the USA. Wasn't happy about that. And then more or less, I've spent most of the last 3 years in and out of Korea, even though I haven't officially been living here. I have spent a lot of time here. So I will say that I'm much more comfortable and much prefer the lifestyle and amenities of Korea. And, the other nice thing about Korea is still communal, right? People still view the world through the eye of not what's best for me, but what's best for we, what's best for us. So for example, even in posh cafes, and I mean, pretty nice cafes, with posh ladies wearing Prada and Gucci and every kind of expensive designer label you can imagine. They still clean up their table. They bust their own tables. They take the trays back and they wipe the table down to make sure it's clean, right? Because the mindset is someone else is going to come and sit here and I want to make sure I leave it the way I found it. So, that attitude suits me much more better than me over everyone else, we over everyone else. And it's still a beautiful thing here, is that there still is this very hard underpinning of community over self. Yeah, I do speak 한국어로 조금 해요. Yeah, I do speak a little bit of Korean, kind of like a 4-year-old. And there's reasons I haven't gotten better at it. One is the classes that I was taking here, they stopped being offered in Daegu. And then the only other class is a full-time, really intensive and not inexpensive set of classes at the university. And I'm in and out of Korea, so I don't really it's that level of commitment is more than I can offer at the moment. But we're hoping that things will become more solid and I will be officially taking up residence here. And then I plan on going to um, 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 Daemyeong University, and taking their intensive Korean classes, so I can get fully fluent the way I should be. Yeah. Yeah, and it's so clean here. I mean, Korea has changed so much in the last 11 years. We have watched so much growth happen here. It's the development, the rate of development, the rate of redevelopment, how they clean up their waterways and their streets. It's been remarkable to watch happen. And most importantly for me, the reconstruction of historic architecture. So in places where the architecture didn't survive because of the various wars that have burnt the Korean peninsula to the ground over the centuries, they have now been tearing down tenement buildings and old blocks of buildings that are sort of post-Korean War, and rebuilding the historic Hanok, the traditional historic architecture that was once there. So, for example, the most beautiful Starbucks in the world is right here in Daegu, South Korea, and it's a gorgeous 17th century style Korean building. Looks like a nobleman's residence. And you can go and sit on the floor in this beautiful space and drink your tea, and you would never for the life of you imagine you were at a Starbucks. So there's all this new, reconstructed, rebuilt historic architecture all over the peninsula. You can now rent on Airbnb and even, booking.com, traditional Korean, historic Korean homes for vacation homes. So you can actually go experience what it was like to live in one of those places, even if it's just for a weekend. There's so many walking paths and bike lanes and, parks, lots of green spaces everywhere being built for people, for the citizens, not just the wealthy, to have access to recreation. Yeah, so it's great. It's really improved, right? And it's still improving. There's still some neighborhoods that they're not dangerous, but there's still some neighborhoods where you're like, yeah, this isn't exactly aesthetically appealing. It has character, but it's not, it still looks a little rough, a little sad. But bit by bit, they're rejuvenating those neighborhoods. Murals are going up, beautiful wall paintings to beautify the space. Benches are being put in, roads are being paved with paver stones. Areas are being pedestrianized. So there's so many pedestrianized parts of Korea now. Yeah. If you, James, if you go to on this channel, I actually did a live stream from the Starbucks a couple of weeks ago, 2 weeks ago, in fact, 2.5 weeks ago. I did one of these live streams from the Starbucks, and I do plan to do another one. It's just been so hot. I haven't, I haven't been able to get there. Hi, Teeny. Hi, baby. You gonna join in? You want to sit on the hemp garment? Of course you do. This is my Chimi, everyone. He's one of our rescue babies. Yeah. Oh, that's a good baby. I don't know if you can see this. That's his brother with his crotch in the air like that. Jesus. Oh yeah. Korean movie Parasite is a very, very interesting movie. I can highly recommend. Korean entertainment is actually reached, I think, is achieving new heights of quality of entertainment, of programming. It really, the movies and the TV shows are just getting fantastic. There's a lot of really great historical K dramas where they're getting better about the historicity of their clothing, although there's still some liberties taken, especially with women's clothing. Um, as always, yeah. But Korean, the things I've learned about Korean history living here, just it make it all because the history here is so different from Europe. It's an entirely different basis for history, for a cultural evolution here. It's so very different. So it's not like learning a Korean version of medieval European history. No, it's a whole different ball of wax. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Genevieve. Boys and their crotches, man. They like to put them out there, don't they? Hi, Tommy. Hi. Yes, you're a sweetie. Tommy still suckles on his suckle blanket. And if any of you are kitty content lovers, I do have a Kitties of the Palace channel that's all about my kitties all the time. I've moved to mostly live streaming content at the moment because I just don't have time to produce any sort of other content for them. But I do just put a camera on them and you can watch them sleep and groom themselves for 3 to 4 hours a day. People seem to like that. And right now but there's a bunch of other content. If you want to see what my kitties actually look like when they're being full kitties, yeah, Kitties of the Palace. And if you're into travel, I have a travel channel also, Travels with the Creative Contessa. I'm working right now. I just went to Tsushima Island, Tamedo, as it's called in Korean. And I, had a fantastic 2 days there. And so I'm working on the travel vlog from that. Some fascinating history, encountered some medieval castle ruins that have been rebuilt. Also, Japan has a similar situation, although for different reasons. They intentionally tore their castles down during the Meiji Restoration when they were trying to westernize and also trying to discourage daimyo from rebelling against the emperor. So they purposefully demolished castles. So thankfully, Japan has also been rebuilding its destroyed castles bit by bit. Or rather, they were doing that in the 90s. They may have stopped. I'm not certain if it's ongoing or not. So I've got a travel vlog coming out about that. So if you're interested in my travel adventures across the world, Travels with the Creative Contessa. Yes. Yeah, the sucky yesterday's live stream from Kitties of the Palace definitely involved Tommy with his sucky blanket. Unfortunately, our babies were all rescue babies. I mean, not unfortunately for us, but for them that they had to be rescued. Tommy and Chimi, the two black and white ones you just saw, their mother was probably hit by a car because the owner of a cafe noticed that one day the mommy just didn't come back. And, mommy cats are not in the habit of abandoning their kittens. So we're pretty certain she was hit by a car. She didn't make it back. And so the kittens needed homes. And they were fostered at first and then they came to us. But unfortunately, they were too young when their mommy was taken from them. And so they both still have a suckle reflex. And in Tommy's case, he has a suckle blanket and he really suckles on the suckle blanket like it's his mommy's teat. So, and he thinks when he gets hungry, that's his go-to thing. So yesterday's live stream was suckle blanket. So I'm doing stab stitches. Hold this up. So this is the sash, this is the waistband basically. And what I've decided to do is actually finish off this pin is marking, this is the part that will actually be the ties. And then from here to here will be the waistband. Right, so from there to there's the waistband. And so I've decided that I'm actually going to finish the ties of the waistband first, and then attach it to the garment. I realized it's easier to sew something if it's not attached to another bigger thing. So finishing the waistband separately, the ties anyway of the waistband, means that once I attach it to the skirt, I don't have to do anything else. That's it. Everything else is done. So yeah, that's why I'm doing this before I attach it. And that seems to be, I'll be interested to see if I can figure that out by examining medieval Korean garments, but that seems to be the way European garments were often made in the 15th century. The ones, when we have records, it seems that often pieces were finished separately, like each piece was finished as much as it could be finished, and then they were attached together. because we actually have inventories in Florence, for instance, of tailors, or maybe Bologna in this case is the one I'm thinking of, a tailor shop in Bologna, a postmortem inventory. So this is how the state of things as they were when the man passed. And they talk about the inventory talks about quarters, doublet quarters. It talks about um, you know, 10 front 10 doublet front pieces and 12 doublet back pieces. And that's not an even number, right? That's not the night. That's not enough for a complete set, which tells me that they were and in various states of finishing was the comment in the inventory, because of course they had to comment that so that they would know how much value to give to the garment. And in fact, in Ireland, there is actually there is a will that refers to doublets, 15th century will from Dublin that refers to doublets, and it refers to one doublet being complete and its value. And then it refers to a second doublet that is on commission and still at the tailor shop, and then provides that value. Because part of the will is knowing the value of things, especially if things needed to be sold off to provide any funds for any of the bequests. So pretty certain that pieces are finished separately as much as possible. So that means, for instance, in the case of a man's doublet, that would be the quilting, the padding and quilting would be done individually separately, and the lining put in and everything all finished, and then it would be put together at the seams. And I also suspect that possibly that also means the lacing holes would have all been done before the garment actually gets put together. So much easier. I haven't done it this way myself yet, but my next farsetto, I'm going to do it this way. So much easier to do all the lace holes in the skirt and in the sleeves and in lace holes and or buttonholes. And in the front, if it's already if it's in pieces and then you put it together, rather than having this whole doublet that you have to manipulate as you're trying to do lace holes and or buttonholes and or attach buttons. Just makes so much more sense. So that's going to be my approach on my next farsetto, is even finishing it up to the point of doing lace holes and buttonholes on the panels before assembling the panels. We'll see if I decide after I do that whether that is the best approach or not. Yeah, we just moved and I found my sewing machine. I can't wait to start sewing again. Oh, I have some sad news about my sewing machine, one of them anyway. So some of you have heard me talk about my antique sewing machine, my antique Kirtle German sewing machine. Beautiful machine. Still in cabinet with the treadle, functions perfectly. Well, it's been a couple of years since I used it, like a lot of years, and we've had several moves in then. And I went to break it out yesterday because I need to get some garments done for Penzik, and I'm not going to have time to hand sew the long seams. I'm just not. So I broke it out so that I could use it to actually sew the long inside seams. And I can't actually pull it up out of its cabinet anymore, because at some point as a result of the move, the iron struts that are fasten this thing into the cabinet, and that are the way the mechanism, the hinge mechanism for pulling the machine up out of the cabinet and putting back in, one of them has bent so much that it no longer comes up through the square hole flush. It's actually crooked and it can't actually come out. Well, that's my mistake for not checking it after every single move, because of course, when things get damaged on a military move, they owe you a new one. So now I don't have any sewing machine here currently that I can use to finish long seams, so I'm probably not going to be able to get any new garments done in time for Penzik, alas. Yeah. Yeah, sewing is great. Sewing is one of my favorite activities. Like, I prefer to sew rather than play games. Now, sewing and dancing, that's a toss-up. I like them both equally. Dancing I like because it's active. But if you give me a choice between playing a game of any kind and sewing something, I will take sewing every single time. And my poor stepchildren who are addicted to gameplay, any kind of game, don't get that. I would rather create something. Actually, not just sewing, any kind of handcraft. Sewing, finger loop braiding, weaving, embroidery, calligraphy and illumination, any kind of handcraft I would rather do than play games. Yeah, I'm really sad. Yeah, exactly, savvy. I'm gonna have to find the right kind of person to help me fix it. Unfortunately, I don't know who that would be here in Daegu, South Korea. So I'm going to have to figure that out. I don't know. I know they had these sewing machines here because in the westernization at the end of the 19th century, the missionaries brought them en masse and the Koreans started using them. And so they now have antique Western sewing machines here as well. So maybe there might be someone here who actually could fix it, hopefully. I've just got to figure out who that person would be. Thankfully, I have Korean friends. They can maybe help me figure that out. Unfortunately, it's a heavy piece of machinery and it's in a cabinet, a wooden cabinet. So it's a big piece of furniture. So it's not something I can just take myself anywhere. And I don't have a car here. I couldn't even I could wrestle it down the stairs, the several flights of stairs from the place where I'm staying, but only if needs must. It would not be fun, and I definitely would not enjoy wheeling it in a cart down the street. So, yeah, I'm not giving up on it, but it just means for the immediate, either I have to find a friend who might have a sewing machine that I can borrow. And I just figured this out last night. So this is still a new wound for me. My beautiful Kohler sewing machine is warped. Um, I'm going to put the word out and see if any of my friends here have a sewing machine I can borrow. Because I would like to get some new garments done for Penzik for my 2-week medievalist event. Actually, I kind of need it because my clothes are literally wearing thin. That's the problem with only, up until now, only hand sewing things. My rate of production is super slow with everything else that I have to do. Because, of course, content creation is not just live streaming. I have finished polished videos, and every 10 to 20-minute video I produce is like 50 to 100 hours worth of work. So that's a lot of time. And, all the shorts I put out, all the posts, that's all time as well. And of course, I also have to eat. So I have to cook because I don't believe in eating processed food. And then, well, if you cook, you have to clean. So it's not like all I do every day is just sit around and sew. I don't have time for that. Therefore, my rate of production is not as quick as one might like. I might be able to buy a cheap to use one. Yeah, I mean, yeah, possibly also that. It means now I have to get one. Whereas yesterday morning, I didn't think I had to buy one or procure one. Now I do. As I said, it's all very new. I'll probably, hopefully be able to find a solution in a timely fashion, but we'll see. I'll keep you all apprised. My preference, my druthers are, of course, I much prefer hand sewing. I love the feeling of the fabric in my hands. I love the sensation of the thread pulling through the fabric as I, you know, gently coax the needle to and fro. And there's something trance like if I weren't talking to you guys, actually, I'd be completely dead silent. And I would just fall into this Zen like trance space, watching my needle go in and out through my fabric. So, I love hand sewing, but but when you have 30 meters of seams in any given gown, um, that's a lot of time. Yeah. So my plan for if I can procure, acquire, obtain in some manner a sewing machine in a timely fashion, my plan is to do all the inside invisible seams on machine and do all of the exterior stuff there, the finishing stuff by hand. That's the plan. Yeah, savvy, absolutely. That is absolutely one of the many reasons why people had fewer garments before the modern era. Um, labor, of course, was more expensive, but also materials were so much more expensive in the medieval world, not just fabric, any raw material. And every raw material in the medieval world is infinitely more, not infinitely, that's hyperbole, exponentially, not hyperbole, exponentially more expensive than its medieval counterpart. Linen, linen in the Middle Ages, I think I once saw a figure, someone did some conversions, 15th century linen, which by the way was probably only 20 to 30 inches wide, not 60. So 20, midi 15th century linen, the really fine linen, Holland cloth, as they call it, not homespun. That would have sold for like $100 an L, right? $100 an L. So when you look at it from that perspective, suddenly you realize that you're going to have exactly one, and the average person is going to have exactly one of these a year at most. If you're lucky, you might get one every couple of years, and you will wear it until it literally wears thin and can't be fixed anymore and can't be patched anymore. And then you will take it from there and you will turn it into something smaller. Maybe you'll cut the pieces up that are still good to cut away the threadbare spots. And you might use those as rags. Maybe you turn them into pouches. Maybe you turn them into kerchiefs, right? And then when those wear out, then you use them as just rags for cleaning. And then when that wears out, it becomes rag paper, hence the term rag paper. Linen, medieval paper was made of linen very often, most often, as far as I understand. So that's why you even the aristocracy had fewer things, right? Even the nobility, even your average monarch had way fewer items than their modern counterparts would own, right? How much? $100 a yard? Yeah. For the fine, I'm not talking homespun. I'm talking about like the fine Holland cloth, the really top quality, high thread count, super finely spun stuff, right? That, and then finely woven. I'm not talking about homespun. Homespun, which is what, the average person is going to have access to, would probably have been, I heard a quote, something like $50 a yard. So still not cheap. And if you're making it yourself, it takes lots of time and effort to do it. So even if you've made it, maybe there's not a money cost, there's a time cost involved. So again, you're still not going to have lots of garments. Yeah, Susan, for instance, um, for instance, children's clothes. Yeah, you absolutely cut garments down into children's clothing. And you can see this in the extant garments we have. You can often see from medieval garments, you can see that they've been cut down from something else in some of them. It becomes obvious that it belonged to someone else of a different size before, and then it gets cut down, and then it gets cut down, and then it gets turned into something else. We have some seal bags from the 14th and 15th century, for instance, that have some interesting seams in them that seem to indicate that before it was a seal bag, it was something else, probably a garment. How many yards per dress? So how many? Yeah. So, it depends on the gown. So we actually do have, thanks to the, expense accounts, and especially expense accounts, less often inventories, more often expense accounts. We know how much cloth would go into any one garment. And so I'll say, for instance, in the Howard household accounts, Lady Margaret's, that was Lady Howard, Lady Margaret, one of her gowns often her kirtles have about 6 L's in them, or yards. I think they're yards. I think it's yards in the Howard household accounts. 6 yards. But now, granted, I think their yard was a little bit bigger than our yard, but not much, still roughly equivalent. Her kirtles generally have like 5 to 7 L's or yards. Her gowns have significantly more. Her gowns have usually like 10 to 15 yards, depending on whether it has a train or not. So, but then the gown isn't just the gown. The gown is the over thing. So, terminology clarification: smock, kirtle, layer dress that goes over top of this was called a gown in 15th century English. So this is not a gown in 15th century English. Not a houppelande either, the over thing in English. Gown or robe. So the gowns were lined. They were lined often in silk or some crazy expensive thing like silk velvet or silk damask or silk. Sometimes they're lined in wool. And then on top of that, they're also furred also. So then you have an entire fur lining that goes into it at the level of the nobility. And even the merchants class, they were doing the same thing, right? The merchants were doing the well-heeled merchants were dressing themselves in the same manner, and sometimes in a more glorious manner. What type of material did they use to make clothing in the 16th century? 16th century is basically the same as the 15th century. They depends on your class, right? So in the peasant, the working class, the working, I'll call them the working class, which includes peasants, farmers, right? Their undergarments are made of linen. They're generally wearing wool. Like wool is Wool is their fabric of choice in Northern Europe. So France, Burgundy, England, Ireland, Scotland. Um, in in and fustian is also a possible outer layer. A fustian is a linen cotton blend for garments that are being made for practical purposes for working garments. And then in the upper classes, so the well-heeled merchants and the aristocracy, linen underlayers still, but then the kirtle could be made of a really fine wool called scarlet in English in this era. Melton, modern English would be the Melton wool would be the equivalent, the closest equivalent I think we have. But kirtles could also be made of silk damask, and we're talking still also in the 16th century. Could be made of various weaves of silk, damask, taffeta, um, velvet, and especially in the 16th century, in the latter half of the 16th century, they start embroidering the hell out of garments, out of the overlayers. Oh dear, I've got a knot. But you know, so those are your basic layers, right? Silk and wool for the outer layers, and different weaves and different patterns, and linen for the layers that go against your skin. And if you'd like to hear my research on the subject of medieval women's underpants, please do see there's a video on my YouTube channel, full length video on the topic of women's underpants, research from primary sources only. If you'd like to see the evidence for and against whether women in the Middle Ages wore underpants. And if some of you are going, wait, is that a debate? Oh, baby, yes, it is. It is a hot debate. And if you want to set your social media wall on fire, all you have to do is state unequivocally medieval women wore underpants. And the reenact, there are a whole holy brigade of anti-women's underpants reenactors will come out of the woodwork and find you. Elena, good to see you. Glad to see you at all. Yeah, we're getting a pretty good crowd these days, right? Lovely to have you back. Ah, Savvy, excellent. Did you enjoy the videos? Were they interesting? Now, I try to present information in as objective a manner as possible, while still, of course, tossing in my signature wit and acerbic and sometimes dark sense of humor. But I do try to, unlike something I was accused recently of the eisegesis of history, the eisegesis of history. Um, but I do try to engage in the exegesis of history and not the eisegesis, which is to say, I try to look at the evidence and see what the evidence tells me rather than the other way around. So, and I actually just found even more evidence. There is of women, of like really hard evidence of women and medieval underpants, and it was what was it? It's a fablio. Yeah, it's a fablio. Right? Quirky, one of these quirky French folk tales from the Middle Ages that, they're usually pretty fairly libidinous, these folk tales are. And this one is as well. And a knight and a lady are trying to engage in some illicit activity. And he runs into the complications of her I think I called it this in my last live stream, her butt call. her her butt coif, her nether region coif. It's called in this 13th century fablio, and he has to remove her nether region coif, in quotes, before being able to complete the act. And so, you know, this is evidence that in the 13th century in France, clearly, at least some women, enough women were wearing it for it to be considered a trope for a bawdy folktale. Yeah. Savvy says the most compelling thing for me in your video was the list of clothing in the will. All the items were women's clothing, and underwear was on the list. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I obviously wanted to present a range of evidence, so not just the absolute most compelling, but sort of leading up to. Yeah, the second you get to a truce, and actually for me, the wills are convincing, but the most convincing for me is a wedding trousseau inventory. Because that is for the woman only. These are garments that the woman is going to use for herself. not for anyone else. And in the in multiple wedding trousseaux from the 14th and 15th century in Florence, you've got women bringing underwear, new and, excuse me, old underwear with them to their marriage. You're not going to bring old underwear for your husband. Also, whose old underwear are you giving him? Your father's and your brother's old underwear? That just makes no sense. So, I mean, I certainly don't mean to say that women through all of Europe, through the entire 1,000 years that is the Middle Ages, across the entire continent, always, no matter what, were underpants. Never said that and don't mean to say that at all. But in some parts and sometimes, some women definitely wore underpants. And I think if I were to if I were to dig further in places like what is now modern day Germany, in Poland and the Czech Republic, if I started digging there, I bet I would find more evidence as well. But I haven't actually looked at those regions at all in terms of primary sources. So, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, if you ever want to set your wall on fire, just make the statement, the unequivocal statement that women wore underpants in the Middle Ages. And I promise you, you will need the fire company to come and put out your wall. So let me just show you the progress I'm making here on my waistband for my danzo. Okay, so obviously I'm going to have to iron this back out, but this is what we've got so far. Here are the little stab stitches, and it's stab stitches all the way. I was going to lace out and do whip stitches, but I decided to do a nice set of stab stitches to make a really clean edge. I mean, it just stab stitches for the win. If you want a nice, clean, neat edge, stab stitches are your baby, right? And I do have some. I do have some. I have a tutorial. I think I share, there is a tutorial on my YouTube channel, I think, just for stab stitches. But if not, there is definitely a mini tutorial included in the project log for making my pink wool Florentine Camorra. Right, definitely I talk about how to do stab stitches in that. So you can check out that video if you want more. There's actually, for this, in the project log for this Camorra, 1470s to sort of 1490s Florentine Kirtle. um, there's lots of sewing tutorials built into that, how to make things, how to line things, how to do lacing holes, how to apply lacing rings, right? I've got all kinds of how-tos built into that project log if you're looking for hints and tips on how to do 15th century stitchery and or tailoring. Lots of things in that project log. You are so creative in stitching. I love stitching. I just love stitching. What can I say? I also, what I also love about the Middle Ages, in particular the 15th century especially, is the challenges, the riddles, the unknowns. I love exploring the unknowns. I love being able to discover something and bring new knowledge and new theories to a table. The later you get in fashion history, the closer you get to the 21st century, the fewer and fewer questions there actually are. And for me, part of the joy of exploring medieval material culture is the literal exploration and the experimentation. Like, the experimentation is so exciting to be able to figure out a pattern for a style of garment that hasn't been made in 600 years, for which we have no more patterns, and to be able to figure out what might have been actually the way in which they patterned that garment. Like, that's exciting when I can actually come up with a way to create something and it creates the right look and it looks just like the portraits and it's using techniques that would have been available to people in that time. That's just really exciting to me. So that's why I actually prefer 16th century. There's not many questions anymore. We have so many extant garments from the 16th century. So many extant garments and textiles from across Europe, right? Italy, Spain, France, England, extant garments. Lots of graves, lots of people in graves. So there's just so many fewer questions about how things were actually done. But in the 15th century, there's still so many questions. And the more, as we are slowly discovering an occasional new garment, extant garment from the 15th century, what we're learning is that 15th century tailoring was actually super advanced and super sophisticated and really scientific, and took advantage of bias and grain and shaping in ways that, the Victorians are get really snobbish about. Oh, poo. I left my snips in the other room. Okay, everyone, brief, like literally, I'll be back in 15 seconds. I've just got to go grab my snips. I'm not going to do what I could do because I don't want to give you guys bad habits. I'm not going to use my teeth to cut this thread. Oh, wait, maybe I have a pair of scissors actually in my sewing box. Bentwood box, just like medieval bentwood boxes for medieval sewing, but from IKEA. No, no, no. Okay, okay, everyone. I will be right back. So you can see my cat under. Do you see the paws sticking out under the pink Kirtle? I just accidentally dumped the dress on him and he didn't even reflect. Okay, 5 seconds. I'll be right back. I just have to grab my snips. Still here. It's still here. Don't go away. Don't leave. I've been sitting there trying to run responsibly and not kill myself. Okay. Snips. I'm back. Okay. Hi, Tommy. Did I wake you up? Oh, has it been a tough morning sleeping comfortably on the luxury settee, laying against the linen wool tapestry? Yeah. Some of you ask about this a lot. Some of you think it's a background, like a green screen background. It's not. This is my tapestry, one of my many, many, many tapestries, and it's actually wool and linen. But it is the wool and linen is woven in a tapestry weave, but it's actually hand painted. It's actually silk screened. The pattern is silk screened on it. Okay, see, I made it 5 seconds, and I didn't slip and trip and impale myself on my super, super sharp Korean snips. Korean snips are no joke. Oh, fun medieval sewing supply travel travel story crossover for my travel channel and my medieval stuff channel. So I went to Tsushima for a visa run because I was getting towards the 90 days of my tourist visa here in Korea, so I needed to reset it. So I needed to be gone for 24 hours. So I went to Tsushima, Damedo, which is an island that lies basically between Korea and Japan, closer to Japan than Korea, but still, it is the historic sort of gateway between Korea and Japan. And I learned a lot while being there. If you're interested in learning the history and seeing the beauty of this place, stay tuned for my travel vlog on my travel channel on my Tsushima visit. But of course, I always bring sewing with me wherever I go, so that if I'm ever sitting and doing nothing else in particular, I have sewing to work on. In this case, I actually brought the stockings, my orange linen stockings that I started patching in the last sewing thing. And of course, I bring my medieval needle cases with me, my pin and needle cases, right? Now, everyone, I would like you to look at the shape of this. And then I'd like you to imagine this shape on an X-ray. What do you think that looks like if it shows up on an X-ray? Yeah, I'll give you all a moment to respond. So I know this is a problem, but what I didn't know is that the ferry that we were getting on would also have an X-ray for security. It does in Korea, doesn't in Japan. So of course, when I'm in an airport and traveling, I always pull these out and break them so that they don't look like what they look like on the X-ray, so that I don't have to deal with the questions about them. But I didn't do this at the ferry port in Busan. And so our bags went through security, went through an X-ray machine. And of course, I get pulled aside for inspection. Munitions, that is exactly correct. Yep. Yep. It looks like munitions. It looks exactly like munitions. It looks like, yep. And so, just like that. So I get pulled over for inspection. Looks like a bullet. Get pulled over for inspection. and I know exactly what they're looking for, like no questions asked. But I'm like, it's okay. It's a needle case. I can show them that it's a needle case. And they're like, oh, needle case. Hmm, I have to go talk to my supervisor. And like, it's like 10 minutes to go and find a supervisor. And then the word comes down, yeah, no, that's contraband. And I thought, oh, frick, they're going to confiscate it, right? No. Thankfully, Korea is at least sensible in this. They literally took them, they put them in this really nice, heavy envelope, sealed it, and gave it, said, wrote down my ticket information and my seat number, and said at the end of the, when you get to Japan, we'll give it back to you. Okay. I mean, I, thankfully, I didn't need it immediately for any hand sewing I was going to do on the ferry itself. So not a big deal. But still, the dangers of the needle case. But meanwhile, by the way, these super razor sharp, can do surgery with, minor surgery with snips, those were no problem. I got to take those on. Man. Yeah, the crazy thing, it's, but that's kind of what happens at any, I travel literally hundreds of thousands of miles a year, and by plane, by bus, by car, you name it. And I go through a lot of airport security checkpoints. And what I've noticed over the years is that if there's anything odd or weird and it doesn't fit neatly into any of their boxes of contraband, even if it doesn't even trigger any of the contraband boxes, if it's odd, they'll consider it contraband. And unfortunately, those security checkpoints, they have ultimate authority. You have no rights. There are no rights. There are only privileges at a security checkpoint. And they will give you the option. Sometimes they'll say you can have it back, but you can't you can't get your plane. I know. I'm so glad I didn't lose the cases either. But one time I was flying to a known world dance symposium in Germany, so a medieval and Renaissance dance conference, immersive medieval and Renaissance dance conference from Korea to Germany, and I was flying via Abu Dhabi on Etihad. And it was all fine. I get to Abu Dhabi and there's a transfer point, and at transfer points, you have to go through security again. And they pull out my needle case, but it's not the needle case they worry about. I had handmade replica sewing needles in there. They confiscated my sewing needles because those are going to be dangerous. But meanwhile, I had a whole box of like 1,000 steel pins. I could keep the pins, but not the replica sewing needles. Yeah, that was yeah, my sign to sign off. Okay, Elena, thank you for joining us. It was lovely to have you. Yeah, sorry, I had to go and look at the chat. So yeah, I have had replica needles confiscated at airport security, which was ridiculous. It's like, what am I going to do with these needles? How am I going to hijack this plane with these needles? It's not going to happen, right? There are people whose fingers are more effective. Well, yeah, most people's fingers are more effective than a sewing needle in hijacking a plane. Ah, yes, travel adventures with medieval gear. Yeah, as some of you know, I attend most of my living history events via airplane. So I have it down to a fine art. If you have questions about how to pack your all of your medieval gear and how to get it into a plane and get it safely to your destination, I'm your Contessa. I know how to do it. I've been doing it for 23 years, because even when I lived in Europe, a lot of the events I attended were in other countries to which I flew. So I've been I've been doing the medievalist thing by plane since 2002. Yep. Hey, travel in period attire and they might let you. Oh my God, travel in period attire. Yeah. If you want to put yourself on the radar of airport security, try wearing either period attire or do what some of my friends did and try wearing your armor to save on having to pay for a checked bag. Ryanair in Germany went full 12th century uh, mail, right? Because mail weighs a lot. Oh my gosh, does mail weigh so much? Maille, guys. And he literally decided he was, if Ryanair was going to nickel and dime him for a bag, then he was going to not oblige them. He would wear his clothes because there's no limit on body weight, right? So a person who weighs 300 pounds pays the same for a ticket as a person who weighs 100 pounds. So his logic was, well, I will then wear my armor. And he actually got into a fight with the supervisor at the airport who didn't want to let him through wearing all that chainmail. Yeah. Yeah. I actually often I have sometimes flown in historical garments. And actually, that is a trick if you want to save on weight allowance and you're flying to a living history event, then don't wear your armor. You're asking for trouble if you wear your armor. But wear your heavy historical garments, because then you're just wearing clothes and they're not going to stop you because they haven't yet started weighing people and charging them to fly by the pound. I'm confident that in the US especially we are close to that, because that's how dystopian air travel is getting for passengers. The passenger experience in the US is hideous. And if you ever get to fly in Europe or Asia, especially Asia, you're going to realize just what absolute garbage we accept as consumers and passengers in the United States. It's ridiculous. But yeah, my one of my travel tips for traveling to medievalist events with a baggage allowance uh, with baggage restrictions, wear your heavy medieval garments on your person. Don't pack them. You'll probably save half of the weight in your bag just by wearing one complete outfit. I would, at least. Fight, argument, argument, not fight. Sorry, Elena, fight, not a fight, an argument, verbal, not physical. Although yeah, it was getting close to a physical altercation. That friend was East German, and he was rowdy. He was rowdy. He was the kind of East German who actually lived in the DDR, and he actually did jail time for refusing to work because he didn't want to be part of the machine. Like, that's the kind of rebel he was. So yeah, um, I'm confident, especially back then in his younger years, he would have absolutely gone ahead and taken it to a physical altercation, but it didn't go there, thankfully. Okay, bye, Elena. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so one of the sashes is now done. Okay, so we've got that's done all the way down to there. And see, look at that beautiful rectangle. Actually, linen is one of the fabrics that's really easy to make into rectangles. You know what fabric isn't easy to make into a rectangle? Silk velvet. You all have heard me whine about it. I'm going to whine about it for a moment again. Silk velvet that has a silk ground is the worst. The worst. It's wonderful. It feels so nice. Like you just want to lie in it and roll around in it like a cat roly-polying on a spot of the floor. But sewing it is hideous. That being said, medieval silk velvet could be on a silk pile like this, but there were also, I just recently learned, there were also less expensive versions of silk velvet, and I didn't say cheap, less expensive, that were woven on a linen or a hemp ground. And the hemp is interesting. And this tells you something about where velvet was actually made in the Middle Ages. And that's because in Northern Europe, there was this weird um, prejudice against hemp. Like, why? I don't know. I have no idea why they would be prejudiced against hemp, but there it is. They were. They didn't think hemp was a worthy fabric. I'm not certain if it was some kind of, racism. Hemp comes from parts of the world, the Saracens. I don't know. I don't know why, but there was. But in the Mediterranean, there was not. And that's why we have lots of records of hemp being used as a stuffing, as a padding, as a fabric itself. And so silk velvet, or velvet, which was silk mostly, there was wool velvet as well, but mostly it was silk. Velvet was woven in Italy. So, and I think Spain also may have also been in the business of silk, of velvet weaving. So that's why the less expensive silks were made on hemp, because they had no problem using hemp. Hemp and linen would make such a better ground for velvet than silk would. Silk, I love you, silk, but man, you've got some real downsides. And slinky slipperiness is one of them when you're trying to sew. So thankfully, I actually therefore am accidentally have an accidental bit of authenticity happening in my fabric storage room right behind me. I bought some silk velvet from Fabric Guru several years ago on super sale. Silk pile, 100% silk pile, but the backing is not. The backing is cotton or some cellulose. It might even be, there might even be one that's polyester. Either way, it's a stiffer backing and so much nicer to work with than silk velvet. 100% silk velvet, the worst. Yeah. So that was something I recently learned that you could have, that they did have, and made it. And in fact, how do we know this? Because they actually have extant velvet remnants that have been excavated in London, and they're in the Museum of London's collection. So I was recently reading through the Museum of London's, rereading, refreshing myself from the Museum of London's textiles, clothing and textiles, the Museum of London Clothing and Textiles, and was looking through the textile remnants section in the back. And here's something that's interesting. So there was this picture of what looked like crinkly thread, like a bunch of crinkly thread in a strip. What the hell's that? And I read the caption and it said silk velvet, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, but where's the, how is that silk velvet? It looks like a bunch of crinkly thread. Then I went and read the text that discusses it. And what they said is that the pile is all that has survived. The silk pile has survived because it's animal protein, and animal protein survives really well unless moths eat it. But the entire, so that is the weft. The entire warp system had disintegrated, which means they're pretty certain that it was either linen or hemp, because plant cellulose, it does not do well in the archaeological record. It generally disintegrates. So basically what they have, all that's left are is the silk pile, which when they found it was all still, kind of cohering together the way it had in life before the ground had rotted away. But they know that, they're 99% certain that the reason the ground is gone is because the ground was linen or hemp. Mind blown, right? And then I started looking at some of the other textiles that are presented in this book, and there were multiple such textiles where it was clearly a compound fabric, meaning, two different kinds of fibers woven, where, because only one system survived, the animal protein system survived, the plant protein system, the cellulose, did not survive. The plant fiber system disintegrated. Which leads me to my next topic, handily. The topic, oh, thank you, Jack. Appreciate you. This is my noble woman super cash at home in her private quarters ensemble while sewing. So that leads me to my next topic, which is the word tartan. And I'm going to be talking next week. I'm going to be doing on Saturday morning, Americas in Australia, Friday evening, Asia, or Friday evening, Americas. I will be doing my medieval myth busting with my friend and colleague, Philip, from the channel Irish Medieval History. And next week, we're going to be focusing on the kilt. So we're going to be talking about Irish and Scottish clothing and the kilt, and busting the idea that it's a medieval garment at all. And of course, on the topic of that, we will discuss, but I'm going to give you a little taster, the topic of tartan. Tartan. Now, a lot of you think tartan is, not so you, my dear viewer, a lot of people, because I'm presuming that maybe some of you in my audience are perhaps more informed on this topic than, say, the average person. But if you're not, let me enlighten you. Tartan, the word tartan, is a descendant of the word tireten in French, from 13th century French. And tireten was a compound fabric. Any kind of compound fabric, but not just any kind. Specifically, tireten in the French sources seems to be a linen wool blend. So linen in one direction, wool in the other, hence the relation to one entire warp system rotting away, that being the plant system. And tireten is in where it appears, because you can see how tireten would become tereten, would become terten, would become tartan, which would eventually become tartan. right? That's an easy, for a linguist, that's easy to see how that evolves. I'm a professional linguist. Some of you don't know. That's my origin story. I'm actually a professional translator and linguist by trade before the machines ate my career field. Anyway, so tartan, tertain, as it appears in the France in the 13th century, is a wool linen blend. And it seems to be a heartier kind of fabric because it appears being used for cloaks. It appears being used for other kinds of outer garments for warmth and for blankets for beds, coverlets. So it is easy to see how this word that means linen cotton or linen wool blend, that is a linen wool compound fabric, would eventually become the what we would be used eventually to make what modern people consider to be a kilt. And you can see how because of that compounding, because of having fibers of wool in one direction, fibers of linen in the other direction, possibly a different color. And even if it's not a different color, it's going to be a different shade, because it's unlikely, especially using natural dyes, you're going to get exactly the same shade of green on wool as the shade of green maybe you could get on linen. So it's easy to see how this blanket material, what we would for blankets, not medieval blanket, that's a bad word, because blanket was actually a kind of fabric in the Middle Ages. Anyway, this how this fabric, this weave of fabric that gets used for things like cloaks and blankets would then be the fabric that they then start using in Scotland. And the word tertain is the word that appears in the 15th century Scots expense accounts of the royal household. Again, being used in combination for things like blankets or cloaks or covers for benches. So more heavy duty use items, or items that are supposed to keep you warm. And the word plaid, by the way, is a Scots word, not a Gaelic word, that means blanket, actually, is the original meaning of the word plaid. And it's easy, and it's sometimes just like the word brat, some people say in Ireland. It's this multi-purpose thing that can function as a blanket, or you can drape it around your body and it becomes a mantle. It becomes a kind of cloak. And then eventually you add a belt to that because it's getting so big, because it's getting cold. So your blanket is getting bigger and bigger. And then you need to belt it just to make it manageable. And yeah, so that's where the word tartan comes from. It comes from French. It's not Scottish. And everyone in Europe had this fabric. And if you start looking, you're going to start seeing that this compound fabric, this checked fabric, what we now call tartan, right? That pattern appears all over Europe. You can see it there's extant textiles from 14th century Italy. There's visual representation in Catalonia in the 14th century of blankets and bed coverlets and garments being made of that. In 14th century Italy, the go-to choice for coverlets, at least as it's depicted in the iconography of the 14th century, is what we would call a tartan or plaid pattern, that checkered pattern, right? It is not a typical traditional Scottish pattern. It is not a typical or traditional Irish pattern. It's a pattern that everyone had for a long time. And it kind of fell out of use in places that were more directly connected to the luxury textile trade, because they just developed better things and had access to so-called nicer things, and so decided they wanted silk coverlets instead of wool linen coverlets, for instance. But the word tartan is not Scots, it's not Gaelic, it's French in origin. And that way of weaving fabric is not unique to Scotland or Ireland at all in the Middle Ages. Yeah. So if you'd like more details on that, stay tuned for our medieval myth busting with Philip from the channel Irish Medieval History. We're going to delve into the whole topic of kilts. We're going to tell you why they're not medieval. We're going to look at actual extant art and help train your eye so you can interpret that art more accurately, instead of seeing what you want to see what's actually there, help you interpret some of the weird folds and layers to try to, teach you how to be able to look at these things and see what people were actually wearing. And we will talk about the origins of what is the actual modern, kilt, modernly speaking. So we've got a good session prepared for you. Lots of great visuals. We'll have our usual PowerPoint visual aid. So yeah, medieval myth busting right here, same bat time or same bat channel, different bat time. I think we're setting off to go 9 a.m. on Saturday morning, Asia, Australia, Australasia. And so that'll be like 8 p.m. New York City time. And then whatever is the respective time for your respective time zone there too. And of course, if you can't be there for the live, we always make the recordings public, so you can always go and watch it later. The Scots and the Irish continued, yeah. Well, Philip from Irish Medieval History and I have been collaborating for a couple of months now, to sort of bring medieval Ireland into the consciousness of medievalists and practitioners of medieval living history, but also to show the vast connections that medieval Ireland had with the continent and the access to luxury goods and the way that the continental fashions also informed fashion in Ireland. So yeah, we've been trying to do crossover for a while, but yeah, it is definitely going to be a total crossover episode. So we will be exploring all of that in depth. So if you're curious about the kilt and where it came from and want me to completely break your heart about Braveheart's Scotsman not ever having dressed that, how the Scotsman in Braveheart definitely didn't dress that way at the actual Battle of Stirling, tune in because busting people's dreams is one of my goals, apparently. Oh, goodness. Yeah. So, these are the kinds of discoveries that I enjoy making. Like I came to those conclusions on my own, by the way, by reading so many different inventories and expense accounts. And also in combination with these fantastic online resources that are now available. For instance, online, there is a digital online Middle English dictionary that you can look words up in. And the wonderful thing about the Middle English Dictionary is that it provides copious examples. It provides a definition, but then it shows you the primary source with quotes, citations from primary Middle English sources with the word in situ, so you can see how the word was used. And that has been really excellent for the exploration of historical fashion, because that's how I found things like evidence of medieval English women wearing underpants, right? Because they're quoted under breaka is a quote that involves a woman wearing them. So yeah, the online, just if you really want to explore historical material culture, if you want to explore historical fashion, you really have to take, if you want to get the full picture and actually find out all of these little details, you have to approach it from a multidisciplinary perspective. You can't just look at art. You can't just look at inventories. You can't just look at expense accounts. You have to read things like books of etiquette, like we were discovering together in medieval story time with the Contessa, how a book of etiquette that is training a valet to serve their lord talks about getting them dressed, and then talks about all the layers of clothing and names the layers of clothing and describes the order in which they should go on. But most fashion historians aren't going to think to look in a book about ostensibly medieval table manners, because that's how the book is billed, as being a book of manual of medieval table manners. But in fact, it's more than that, right? So you have to, if you want to really understand historical fashion, and even on a pragmatic level, on the level of what are the layers that they're wearing, I'm not even talking about philosophical. You really need to approach it from a multidisciplinary perspective, and that's always been my approach to anything. Medieval dance, some of you may not know, I'm one of the world's premier experts in medieval and Renaissance dance. um, Even though I don't really have a credit to my name, I would bet that there's no PhD out there who knows more than I do. And I'm not, that's not hubris. I'm going to bet they don't, because that's the depth of research that I've done in the topic. But if you really want to understand and research medieval and Renaissance dance, you can't just look at dance manuals. You can't just look at art. You have to read chronicles. about every kind of festivity you can imagine, because those chronicles of those festivities then talk about people dancing. It places dance in its context. It gives you clues like who danced. Was it just one couple out there on the floor, or one set, or was it multiple people? How did the audience react to, say, the king dancing and passing by as he comes? Like, these are all the things you need to understand if you really want to accurately recreate medieval and Renaissance dance. But so many of my colleagues who teach medieval and Renaissance dance have never looked in those sources. And so they teach a dance, but they don't teach the medieval dance. They teach it like it's some kind of modern folk dance, but they're not teaching it from the perspective of someone who lived in that era. And so you don't get a full understanding of the dance. Wait, sorry, question. Let me just scroll back. My lady, what was the sewing string made out of? Wool, thanks. This is silk. I am sewing with silk. This is actually on a replica medieval shuttle, actually, for weaving, but I use it as a spool in any case. Yeah, so silk. Wool thread, there is some evidence of wool thread having been used. And I'm sorry if I missed some questions and comments. I get on a flow and I just want to finish the thought. There is some evidence of wool being used for sewing garments, but less and less the later you get in the Middle Ages, until by the time you get to the 15th century, I can't think offhand of any of extant garments that have wool sewing thread in them, and I can't offhand. No, there's nothing triggering in my memory about having read something in any sort of primary sources referring to wool as a sewing thread. Earlier, it's definitely used as a sewing thread, but by the 15th century, it seems that the threads of choice are either silk or linen. Yeah, that seems to be the case. And again, I can't prove a negative. Oh boy, I'm really back. It's so fascinating how anthropologists can partner with modern hairstylists, seamsters, and you said multidisciplinary approach is essential. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. So yeah, and I wish, honestly, I wish doctors, specialists would take this approach to the human body, right? Like um, a rhinologist, supposedly is a specialist, is a specialist in the kidney, supposedly. But okay, the kidney, your kidneys don't just function kind of on their own in the ether, right? They're attached to other organs and other systems. So something going wrong with your kidneys might not be just your kidneys going wrong, or might not be your kidneys actually at all. But if the rhinologist is only looking at your kidneys, that doesn't sound right. Rhinologist. That doesn't sound right for kidneys. There's another word I feel like. Anyway, if you're not looking at the other systems too, then you're going to miss the picture of the whole body as a system. Same thing with the study of history, in my opinion. Even if you focus on military history, if you don't have a basic understanding of the way in which your subjects actually lived, you don't understand the clothes they wore, you don't understand the food they ate, you don't understand the rituals they engaged in through their daily lives, and how can you understand those great generals, really? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you, ooh, oh, oh. Appreciate that. Yeah. So I try to approach most things even cooking. Even cooking, even my modern cooking. If I'm making an Indian dish, for instance, an Indian curry, then I go and look up the history of that curry, and I understand where it started, how it developed, how it appears, its various incarnations in various parts of India, why the ingredients are the way they are, what is the science behind the ingredients, what is the science behind the techniques that you use in cooking that dish. Like, I don't even approach cooking from a simplistic one-dimensional perspective. Which is why I could never get bored as an immortal. I could live forever quite happily. There would always be something new to learn. There would always be new discoveries. Whether new or old, there would always be things to experience that are different than anything before. Yeah. So let's see. Oh, I've also been relearning, refreshing my understanding of medieval spices, and I have a fun origin story to share with you. I think it might be Pliny the Elder or Herodotus. I'm not certain. Actually, I don't know. It's a tale that's floating around in the Middle Ages, but I kind of feel like I meant to look this up and double check. I feel like the origin of the origin story might actually be Herodotus or Pliny the Elder. But one of the in the Middle Ages there was this kind of folk origin story going around about the origin of pepper, black pepper. Of course, black pepper was black gold in the Middle Ages. It was literally used as a currency in some cases. That's how expensive black pepper was. And so it didn't grow in Europe. It can't grow in Europe. It's the climate is absolutely not right. Europe, black pepper comes from a creeper vine, a tropical creeper vine, and it needs moist, hot conditions, and it needs trees and things on which to grow so that it can creep and grow. And the peppercorns are actually the berries. Most people don't know that. They think it's a seed. I mean, there's seeds inside, but it's a berry, like the way berries are. Right. Okay, come on, Jamie. Come on. You gonna come up? Well, come on. Come on. Goodness. Don't have to whine about it. Just come up here. So yeah. So black pepper is a creeper vine. And most Europeans had probably, except for the intrepid ones who actually went out and explored Asia, and there were those. But your average European in the Middle Ages didn't make it all the way to India and Sri Lanka, where black pepper is native. And Chimi, I can't, I have to sew Chimi and I have to talk. This is not petting Chimi time. This is my life, by the way. This is how it goes. If I try to do anything for myself, my kitties invariably make sure I understand that they are the primary focus of my life. Anyway, oh, that's a good Chimi. Yeah, good baby. So, your average European had no idea about black pepper, but they knew it was black. And they thought that it was black because it had burnt. And they thought it had burnt because the origins myth is that black pepper grows in a forest that is protected by snakes, serpents, lots of poisonous serpents. But therefore, to harvest the black pepper, you have to set fire to the forest and it drives the serpents out. And then you have to go in and super quickly harvest the pepper before the serpents come back. But that's why the pepper's black, because you set fire to the forest. But thankfully, the peppercorns survive in the black form, which is the form you want. So that is the fun medieval origin myth about black pepper. That it was a tree first off, possibly a tree they thought, and that it was a forest, and that you would set fire to the forest to drive away the protective serpents. That would turn the peppercorns black. You would go and harvest them before the serpents came back and bit you and killed you. Yeah. So, cow cat, yeah. Oh, kitty. And so, the other thing I learned in that process or refreshed myself, because I've been to Sri Lanka and I've actually been to a plantation that grew black pepper. And what I'd forgotten, but I relearned in this process is the only difference between white and black pepper is that white pepper is what happens when you take the freshly harvested peppercorns, which are naturally green, by the way, and you soak them in water, and it soaks the cover off of them and it makes them more mild. And then after a couple of days, and then you take them out and dry them. Don't dry them in the sun, though. The black peppercorns are the ones that are harvested directly and then just laid out in the sun to dry. And so basically, they get sunburned. The black peppercorns are sunburned, and that's what makes them black, is the UV light. And I was commenting to the condottiero this morning that, okay, so maybe medieval people and or Pliny the Elder and or Herodotus weren't completely off the mark. Maybe the sun is a big ball of flames as far as medieval people are concerned, and is the plasma flames, whatever. And so it is the UV from the big ball of flames in the sky slash plasma that is turning them black. So maybe it's not such a far cry to call forest fire as the reason they're black, is maybe slightly accurate. Anyway, I jest. Obviously, I know that the sun is not a big ball of flames. It's freaking plasma. But yeah, still, I find it funny that, you know, there is certainly a combustion component involved in the creation of black pepper, no matter how you look at it, whether it's people setting fire to the forest to drive the snake out, or the combustion of the sun, which results in UV light, which then, burns, basically sunburns the peppercorns into their tasty black and more intense and spicier flavor. Yeah, the babies are all cute. We have cute kitties. I don't know. Have any of you seen, okay, cat lovers, be honest with me. Just the cat lovers. If you're not a cat lover, this question doesn't apply to you. Have you ever seen a cat that wasn't cute or pretty? Like, did you ever see a cat where you thought, "Ooh, not cute"? I'm trying to think about it, and I can't think of a time when I saw a cat and didn't respond with the "all how cute" response. I feel like that microbe with which I probably was infected right after birth because of the cats that slept in the crib with me. Probably has influenced me to think that all felines, no matter what, are adorable. So I know I can't be objective about my cats. I think they're all cute, of course, but they're my cats and they're cats. So yeah. Yeah. Oh, it wasn't Tommy, it was Chimi. Chimi's original foster. Tommy was with Ashley. She wanted to keep him, but Tommy was apparently an asshole and didn't get along with her other cats. No, Chimi, the one in my lap right now. Chimi was the one whose foster family didn't know how to handle feral kittens. And so he was just basically abandoned, left alone for 2 months. I mean, he was fed and his litter box was changed, but they didn't do anything with him. So we had to socialize him ourselves when we got him. It was pretty easy though. Food. Food is the way to a cat's heart. 100%. 100%. If you want to make a cat love you, just feed it. By from your hand, by the way. You can't just put the food in the bowl. You actually have to like make them come to you for it. That's how we did it with him. Yeah. So let's see. What other fun things did I have for you today? Let me go to my out. Well, might be me stitching my fingers shut after having just shoved a needle through it. Oh, Timmy, what is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Did I move? Yeah. Well, I have failed as a kitty servitor once again. Timmy, what is it, baby? Hmm? Did I move? Was that too much movement for you? Oh, another medieval belief about black pepper is that a 14th century belief that it could cure plague, that it was a cure for plague. And I mean, black pepper is full of active compounds. And I mean, it is absolutely, there's definitely medicinal compounds contained within. I don't think that it's probably going to be very effective against Yersinia pestis. Um, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I can certainly see how if you took God, if you just ground up pepper or just ate corn straight, I could see how you would feel that that should be medicinal and that that absolutely should cure plague. Because it would feel like something was happening anyway. When did the thimble get invented? Thimbles. So there are thimbles dating back across multiple cultures, actually, for thousands of years. I think the oldest extant thimble I've seen dates to like 5,000 years ago or something like that. So thimbles have been around for a long time. I do not like thimbles personally for regular sewing because I like to have the control and dexterity of my full fingers, which means that I can't have a thimble on it because the thimble gets in the way. If I were sewing something really dense and thick, like layers of canvas for a pavilion, which I have done, by the way, then the thimble comes into play. But otherwise, I definitely just prefer to use my fingers, and I definitely prefer to just have my fingers take the damage from occasionally stabbing myself rather than lose the control that I get, the granularity that I get. Tell us about your tapestry. Can I explain the scene? Okay, yeah. So this tapestry, this is a replica, a copy of the series that is in the Musée de Cluny in Paris, the Cluny Museum. This is La Dame à la Licorne, the Lady in the Unicorn, which is an allegorical series of tapestries. I have all of them. It's the five senses plus desire, plus a tapestry that's literally says je vous désire, desire on it. And so each of them is an allegory of the five senses. Now, let me see. Okay, can you all see what instrument she's playing here? Can anyone see this? Yeah. So this is that is a portative organ. A portative organ means an organ that is portable, can be carried around rather than an organ that's built into a church. And this was an instrument that apparently ladies played in the 15th century. And you can see her damsel is actually operating the bellows to provide the air so she can play the organ. And so this is an allegory of the sense of hearing, ouïr. And the other reason you can tell it's an allegory is because of the clothes that these women are wearing. Their clothes are very fantastical. If you wanted to make a 15th century costume, I mean, a costume for fancy dress ball, as a 15th century person would have understood fancy dress costume, then this is your inspiration, because this is a 15th century artist's idea of fantastical clothing, not real clothing that real people wore. Hence why there's all these extra jewels, and she's got just a frontlet on, with the frontlet is, I didn't bring my frontlet here. My black silk velvet frontlet probably. And she's got her hair bound up. You can't see it. Sorry. You can't see it. It's there. Trust me, it's there. But that's not an example of how real women dressed or real ladies dressed. This is an artist's idea of a fantasy woman, of fantasy ladies, basically. Yeah. Oh, love a medieval allegory, right? Yeah. All of the Dame à la Licorne series are all allegorical. Love a good allegory. Yeah. Historical art is one of my, history of art is one of my hobby specialties. I mean, I actually did study it as uh, part of my university studies. I studied the history of Spanish art in Spain, and I studied the history of French art in France. And I've studied the history of Italian art in Italy. So I actually a pretty deep, in-depth background in art history. So I do love a good allegory. I love being able to figure out what the symbolism in a painting is. And medieval paintings are known for being dense with symbolism and nuance and euphemism and allegory, and there's another word I'm looking for. Oh, it's gone. That's okay. But yeah, that's what's going on in the background. Uwu, what is your question is about the organ? What about the organ, the portative organ? Oh, is that part of you mean, is this some kind of euphemism? No. No, I don't think so. Not in this case. I think in this case it is just an allegory of the sense of hearing, not some kind of sexual reference. At least not in this case. Could be, but I don't think it is. Contemporary 15th century fantastical costumer. Yeah, exactly. So if you ever, I love hosting 15th century costume balls, by which I mean 15th century noblewomen hosting a ball with a fancy dress theme, as 15th century people would have done. And then that gives me an excuse to make clothing like this to wear to my 15th century fancy dress ball. And we know that they made costumes like this because they appear as costumes, because they appear in the expense accounts and inventories, or the expense accounts, not so much the inventories, the expense accounts under the heading of clothing for a disguising, or materials for a disguising, or dress for a disguising. So we know that they made costumes that were fancy dress, that weren't supposed to be worn every day. They were just for the performance of such and such a thing. And we have in-depth, and in fact, I think I'll do some readings. I'll do at upcoming story time with the Contessa. I'll do a reading of the Feast of the Pheasant, which is this amazing feast that was hosted by Charles the Good, the Duke of Burgundy, and an attempt to drum up crusading fervor to recover Constantinople. And so as part of the feast, he had these amazing mezze, entremets, as they're called in French, these in between the course performances, spectacles that were all allegorical. And that we're talking in the Great Hall, a full float, like a parade float, with mechanical devices for special effects and people dressed up as representing various things. For example, a woman dressed up as ecclesia, as the church. And so we know for a fact that probably these were real clothes, but not in the sense of clothes that people would wear daily. These were the clothes that artists probably of the kind they would see in these entremets, in these masques, masque, which is not a masquerade ball, by the way. Yeah. Yeah, an old-timey costume party. Let me tell you, as far as I can tell, I think that the ancient Romans might have been the first cosplayers, actually. That I now, if any of you have evidence of cosplaying before the ancient Romans, and I don't mean modern people cosplaying ancient Rome, I mean ancient Romans cosplaying their ancestors and gods and goddesses. So, but I think that's the earliest records I've seen of cosplay. If any of you know of cosplay from other cultures and earlier, either in the Mediterranean or in other cultures that predate ancient Rome, let me know because I'm super fascinated by the idea of historical cosplay. And by historical cosplay, I don't mean medieval living history. I mean of our ancestors cosplaying their ancestors or their gods and goddesses. Because that's just so fun to see the kinds of ideas, concepts, and activities that really do connect us, right, to our that connect us across the centuries. In some ways, there's just nothing new under the sun. Oh, let's see. Damn it. Sorry. Yeah. So, yeah. Oh, goodness. We're getting up towards 3 hours. Well, I did take a whole hour just discussing my theory on kirtles and explaining the kirtle and the different sorts of layers and whatnot. So that took longer than I expected it to. I expected to get more sewing done today, but the discussion on kirtles and the stomacher versus the different styles of lacing and the different construction styles, like that was important to me to get that out there because those were I've had multiple questions on that. So yeah, as you see, when you ask me questions in the comments under my video, oh, Marwa Smith, thank you. Welcome to the community. I hope that you feel inspired and join in the creative process. Welcome to the journey. Um, yeah, I when you guys ask me questions in the comments, especially if they're of interest to a greater audience, I definitely like to address them in depth in these live streams because if you have that question, probably someone else does too. So definitely, if you're watching my videos and you have questions about things, please pop them in the comments because it's easier for me to track comments under videos. It's less easy for me to track comments in the live chat, unfortunately. Because there is no way to just search the live chat. I would actually have to watch the whole video again to get to the live chat. Yeah, appreciate you joining. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my 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 sponsors. Number one, my patrons and my channel members. You guys, some of you have been supporting me for years, and I really appreciate that. If you're interested in supporting my work in a more financial manner, and you'd like to benefit from all sorts of perks like full length videos, unedited, uncut, including full length getting dressed videos that don't have any cuts, and you can actually hear us talking and laughing and making jokes and see the entire process from beginning to end. Also, tutorials on dance and sewing that are not available to the public. Also, we do live stream, we do Zoom sessions together so we can actually interact and not just via live chat. And all sorts of other perks, extra resources I share with my patrons and channel members, primary sources, things of interest. When I encounter them, I share them with you guys. So if you're interested in receiving those extra perks, consider becoming a channel member or patron on Patreon. There's also the super chat function. Some of you have used that, and I really appreciate all the generous people who have used the super chat to basically tip me for my work. But I also understand that not everyone is financially uh, solvent enough to be able to contribute in that manner. So I appreciate you all just being here, being part of the community, joining in these live streams, asking questions, joking, answering questions in some cases, getting creative with me from your respective place in the world. So I appreciate all the forms of support. On a more pragmatic level, another of my sponsors is the jeweler, the medieval goldsmiths, Armor and Castings, who do amazing replica items. And I seriously don't know where the collar went. Like this is a little weird. But for instance, Armor and Castings make these amazing replica. This is a 15th century Burgundian pendant, right? Isn't that gorgeous? Right. So armorandcastings.com if you'd like to purchase your own medieval bling, replica medieval bling. They do belt fittings, they do all kinds of jewelry, they do some other fascinating random anything that was kind of cast or vaguely jewelry related in the Middle Ages, they do it. And if you enter the code Contessa 10 at checkout, you'll get an extra 10% off discount off of your purchase. And I really believe in their product. They're Ukrainian, so you can imagine they've had some tough times these last couple of years, but they've still managed to stay in production. So yeah, Misa, welcome. Thank you for joining us. But I do appreciate everyone coming and letting me know, even, leaving comments, leaving emojis. Susan, you're one of my super duper fans. You go the extra mile everywhere you leave comments. You ask questions, whether or not you actually have the question, you make sure you post it anyway. So Susan, you are one of my superstars. You are definitely a channel superstar. So yeah, basically I have now finished the sashy part. The sashy part, that sounds weird, but the sash part of the waistband for my 17th century Korean culotte, what modern people would call a petticoat. So there is a rectangle number 2. Nice and neat. Here we go. Ta-da. Yeah. Okay, so, oh yes, Susan, this is the pendant. If you look, one of my very recent shorts, if you'd like to know how men in the Middle Ages, in the 15th century specifically, wore jewelry, and they did lots of it, then check out the short. It came out just a couple of days ago, Medieval Men in Jewelry and How They Loved It, and see examples based on, with my condottiero showing you in real life, compared against the portrait that shows various portraits that show how men wore their jewelry. So yep, you were right, Susan. This is that pendant, that nouch, as they were called in 15th century English. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the book corner section of our live stream. Right, so I've got some fun ones with you today, and I'm going to actually do a reading from 2 of them. Okay, How to Read Eastern Art. This is a historical book on Asian art, but specifically Korean art. And this is the one that I said is sassy and snarky and oh so fun. Like, most people don't read what's written in art books. They just look at the pictures. Oh no, you want to read this. And let me give you 2 examples of why you want to read this. So first off, let me show you the painting that we're talking about. These cute little quails, right? Quails are so adorable. They are totes adorable. Yeah, book corner. So quails. I love quails. I think they're some of the cutest birds on earth. Oh, but our author, Chu Yong Jin, does not agree with me. Here's what he has to say about quails. Here's the figure caption. Although the quail has neither beautiful colors nor a handsome shape, it was an important subject matter in Eastern art. It is hard to fathom why painters should have bothered drawing such a homely bird. And but the slander does not stop there. This quail can't get a break. The quail is not an attractive bird, regardless of the beholder. In fact, its appearance has inspired the Sino-Korean expression to hang a quail, which means ragged clothes, probably because of the drab protective coloring of the quail's plumage. Its shape is no more flattering. It looks like it's missing its tail. Yet Chinese painters used to be very zealous about drawing this bird. Why did Hui Zhong, the last emperor of the northern Song, draw the unsightly quail rather than gorgeous and stately birds? And why did the quail remain an important subject matter in Eastern art? I mean, does it mean that people back then drew the quail because they found it comely? It's like, And the whole thing. And okay, so let's talk about the bat. The entry on the bat is pretty funny too. The bat, which boasts no attractive features whatsoever, turns up on the pull handles of mirror stands because it signifies fortune. The creepy bat is found drawn in large numbers, even on rice pools. Another extreme example is the bat. The appearance, cry, or biology of the bat is probably endearing to no one. Nevertheless, it is featured on the handles of trousseau items and mirror stands. Yeah, it's like, wow, the creepy bat. Its appearance, cry, or biology is probably endearing to no one. Yeah, so if you would like a snarky and hysterically snarky read on Korean art, historical Korean art. I mean, there's actually information here too, but the snark alone is worth it. How to read Eastern art. Okay, along the subject of art, because I kind of fell into a theme here, because you might have noticed my most recent community post slash wall post, one of the more recent ones, like yesterday's, I think, was about Jean Fouquet's amazing portrait of Pietro Gonella, the court jester in the Este court in the mid 15th century. So I thought we'd just lean into that, hence how to read Eastern art. Also, the secret language of the Renaissance, specifically Renaissance art, decoding the hidden symbolism of Italian art. Okay? Decoding the hidden symbolism of Italian art. This is fascinating because this is going to help you, especially those of you who are interested in medieval material culture and you're using art to try to get ideas about medieval material culture. Well, this is going to tell you, whether you should interpret it as literally as you want to. You're going to be able to look at paintings after this and immediately identify whether that is a saint so and so, what the meaning of the cross in the sky is, why there's a hand over there with little writing coming out of it, right? The Secret Language of the Renaissance by Richard Stemp. I got this at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a couple of years ago. Really, really recommend. Really interesting, will really open up your eyes. Also from the Met, How to Read Medieval Art. And yeah, what is the dividing line between medieval and Renaissance? It gets kind of blurry, but of course, the pictures in here are also fantastic. Really high quality, high def pictures of a lot of things of interest to those who wish to know more about medieval material culture. But again, it's going to teach you about the symbolism that you see in art. It's going to, so that you can now start looking at these artwork, and then you're going to know instantly, okay, is this allegorical? What does it mean, right? What kind of story is it trying to tell, right? Like for instance, see that candle there? Maybe, can you see the candle there? The candle is snuffed out and it's freshly snuffed out. And that's possibly looking forward to, because this is Mary and the Annunciation. So the snuffed out candle, I would look at that and I would say, well, that's a sign of death. So is that the sign that, the future that Jesus will face, that the Savior will face, right? Death and the resurrection. So yeah, how to read medieval art. And then the last one I'm going to get to today is a bit off the cuff. I've mentioned it before, but I wanted to mention it again off the cuff. It's still art. It's art adjacent. So if you'd like a manual of medieval art, how to actually make pigments, how to make medieval plaster of Paris, how to make tracing paper, how to make charcoal for drawing. There's actually instructions for things like how to make good and perfect and slender coals for drawing. Take a nice dry willow stick, right? Like it actually starts with take a stick and then you can make your own charcoal. If you're interested in medieval arts and crafts, actually as they were done in the Middle Ages, step-by-step instructions here. So this is Il Libro dell'Arte, the Craftsman's Handbook by Cennino d'Andrea Cennini. And it's got footnotes that are really helpful with other resources. Sometimes it's compared against the Theophilus. So yeah, really good resource, an absolute must-have for people interested in recreating medieval material culture and engaging in medieval arts. There's also tips about embroidery. There's tips about dyeing cloth in here. So yeah, even if you're not into the art part, there's still lots of good things in here in the the artist, the craftsman's handbook, the artist's handbook, depends on how you look at it. Could be either or. Okay, everyone. Well, we're coming up on 3 hours, which is my cutoff for our live streams for technical reasons. I might be doing some more random live streams throughout the week. And of course, there will be medieval story time again this coming Friday morning Asia time or Thursday evening America's, middle of the night Europe. So if you'd like to just hear me reading to you from various primary sources, and maybe some other things, then join in for that fun. Otherwise, I really appreciate you all watching. If you're watching this as a recording and you have questions, pop them in the comments and I will get to them. If you're watching this now and you'd like to support the channel a little bit more, just pop in an emoji or comment under the video once it posts that, algorithm, blah, blah, blah. Otherwise, I thank you all for joining me here today, and I look forward to seeing you in future sessions. Until then, everyone, may your journey continue